They thought she was just another CEO trapped in the glare of chandeliers and cameras. They thought the quiet janitor standing nearby was nothing more than a man with a mop. They were wrong. What followed would silence a ballroom of hundreds, rattle the glass walls of Boston's tallest hotel, and spread like wildfire across the world. A woman's company was on the brink. A predator's circle was closing, and one single dad, haunted by scars of war, but anchored by the small hand of his daughter, would decide that enough was enough. Follow my story to the very end, and when it's done, let me know the city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story can travel. The chandelier trembled above the Imperial Harbor Hotel ballroom, scattering prisms of light across polished marble. 1,000 threads of conversation buzzed beneath it, sharp and electric like power lines humming after a storm. Photographers hovered near the staircase, their flashes bursting like heat lightning, capturing the arrival of Boston's most powerful names. Tech investors, hedge fund titans, venture capital sharks, all orbiting the same event, circling the same prey. In the center of it all stood Clara Morell, CEO of Morell Innovations. Her tailored blazer clung to her shoulders like armor. Her jaw was lifted, chin tilted at the exact defiant angle that dared men in expensive suits to underestimate her. But the circle of those suits was closing. Their smell was money and cheap power, mixed with cologne that lingered too heavy in the air. At their center stood Victor Kane, his smile all ice and teeth. "Sign it today, Clara." Victor murmured, his words crisp enough to slice. "Your board will thank you, or watch your company drown." Her fingers tightened around the pen she had refused to lift. Every muscle in her hand screamed to throw it at him, but she held still. A soldier's stillness, though she had never fought a war. Her eyes scanned the crowd, reporters, hotel guests, executives craning their necks from the balcony. Not one ally stepped forward. Security stood at the edges of the marble floor waiting, but not moving. The men surrounding Victor were the kind that made even uniformed guards hesitate. Near the coffee cart, away from the circle of power, a man in gray work boots adjusted a chrome urn. His shirt bore a stitched name in fading blue thread, Daniel Callahan. His dark hair was flecked with the dust of long hours in the hotel's service corridors. His face was quiet, stone eyes, steady, like a river in winter. Beside him, a little girl hugged a backpack shaped like a fox. Emma Callahan, 8 years old, clutched its ears as though they were talismans. She shouldn't have been there, not in the heart of Boston's most ruthless tech summit. But Daniel was on break, slipping up from the boiler room, only to return his daughter's forgotten homework to a tutor upstairs. One small detour, one ordinary errand had landed them in the middle of something that was about to explode. A stocky enforcer broke from Victor's circle. His tailored jacket stretched at the seams of his biceps. He cut across the carpet and planted a hand squarely on Daniel's chest. "Move along, old man," the enforcer sneered. "Grown-ups are working." Daniel didn't answer. He looked down at Emma. Her brow furrowed, her lips pressed into a line that was too young to carry so much courage. Daniel reached out and touched the cap of her fox backpack. His voice was soft, measured the cadence of someone who had practiced keeping fear out of his tone. "Stand by the cart, count to 20. Emma nodded. She trusted the rhythm of his words more than anything else in the world. The enforcer shoved, hard, but the shove never landed the way he expected. Daniel's left hand rose no higher than a half moon. The push slipped past him, redirected like water missing a stone. His right palm tapped the man's elbow, shifting his weight. A boot slid behind the enforcer's heel. Gravity finished what Daniel had begun. The man hit the marble with a thud that echoed across the lobby. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the espresso machine hissed itself into silence. For a moment the world stopped. Victor's circle stiffened. Disbelief loosened their ties. Another enforcer lunged forward. Daniel stepped in shoulder-tight, hips low, guiding the punch away from his face. His knuckles touched a nerve above the man's bicep. The attacker's fingers uncurled like glass slipping from a hand. His phone clattered to the floor. Daniel set him down gently without triumph, as though returning something misplaced. From across the circle, Clara's voice broke through, steadier than she felt. "Sir, please. This isn't necessary." Daniel's gaze never left the men surrounding her. "It became necessary when they boxed you in." His words carried the calm weight of a man who had already walked through worse storms. Victor's smile cracked. He snapped his fingers. 4 more men moved as one. The crowd inhaled sharply, some raising phones, others whispering prayers. By the coffee cart, Emma traced numbers with her fingertip along the Fox backpack. 11, 12, 13. Her lips moved silently, her count anchoring her father to the world. One man reached for Daniel's collar. Daniel pinned the wrist, his other hand sliding to the thumb, a gentle twist that made the attacker's knees fold beneath him. A second swung wide. Daniel stepped under the arc, his palm pressing a nerve at the hinge of the jaw. The swing died. A knee buckled. Balance whispered goodbye. The third tried a bear hug from behind. Daniel's hips sank back solid as stone. A heel stamped across the attacker's foot, and the man crumpled, gasping. Daniel looked almost apologetic, like a teacher correcting posture in a classroom. He never punched. He redirected. Every ounce of force was measured. He kept the chandelier unshaken, the glass intact. He made the chaos elegant. Clara exhaled, her chest loosening for the first time since the circle had closed around her. The pen slipped in her grip but didn't fall. She studied the quiet maintenance man, the economy of his movements, the unshakable focus, the way he placed himself as an unspoken barrier between her and the threat. Recognition tugged at her memory. A headline. A faded photograph. Something in desert dust. Emma reached 20. She did not move. Her voice rose clear as a bell. Dad Daniel didn't look. He didn't need to. The word bound him to the moment tighter than steel. Victor's ice smile dissolved into a snarl. He gestured sharply. 6 more men pushed through the crowd. You want to play hero? Victor's voice slithered across the marble. Fine. Let's see how many coffee breaks you've got left. They rushed. And time for Daniel Callahan narrowed to a single square of marble in 4 steady breaths. The lobby seemed to contract as the next wave closed in. Polished shoes thundered across marble suits, cutting through the crowd like black water. Daniel didn't flinch. His boots slid across the floor, marking out a tiny square, 4 corners, 4 steps that became his battlefield. His breath was steady, his shoulders loose. The first man reached him with a roar that was meant to intimidate but carried more panic than power. Daniel moved 1 inch, no more. A hand met the inside of the forearm, redirected it past his chest, and his shoulder followed through with quiet inevitability. The enforcer's balance betrayed him. His body tumbled to the ground in a graceless heap. The second man lunged low, aiming for Daniel's legs in a clumsy tackle. Daniel pivoted, borrowing the man's momentum, and let gravity punish him instead. The marble floor kissed his ribs with a thud that silenced even the most eager onlookers. Phones rose higher into the air. Someone whispered, "He's not even trying." Another gasped, "He's trained. He's military." Daniel heard none of it. His ears had long ago learned to filter out the noise of spectators. The only sound that mattered was Emma's quiet counting, still ticking upward by the coffee cart. 21, 22, 23. 2 more circled him, waiting for an opening. They feinted, tried to test his patience. Daniel let them move. Let them think they had control. Behind him, the air shifted, the sound of a heavy body rushing. Daniel stepped an inch to the side. The man behind him missed, slamming chest first into his own ally. The 2 collapsed together, cursing, fumbling. From the crowd, laughter broke through the tension. Nervous at first, then louder, like relief spilling out. Clara felt it ripple around her. Fear was bending into something else. Something Victor hadn't intended admiration. Victor's jaw tightened. His finger twitched at his side, a tiny tick that betrayed his composure. He wasn't used to losing control, especially not in front of cameras. Clara, for the first time in hours, felt air reach her lungs. She studied Daniel, not just the way he moved, but the choices he made. He never struck with fists meant to harm. He guided, redirected, lowered each man gently when he could. He fought like someone who had sworn to break as little as possible. Another enforcer swung desperate, his punch slicing the air wide. Daniel sank low, his palm brushing the man's sternum in a precise spot that stole breath without breaking bone. The attacker folded eyes wide, gasping like a fish pulled from water. The room's atmosphere shifted again. Even the chandelier seemed to glow brighter, reflecting the collective realization that this janitor was something else entirely. "Call the police?" Clara commanded, her voice sharp and steady as she looked toward a stunned reporter frozen mid-note. "Call them now. Call them here." Victor smirked. "They already know me. They know who pays their overtime." Daniel's voice carried across the lobby, calm as still water. "And you know who pays mine." His chin tilted toward Emma. "She does in the stories I'll tell her tonight about why doing right is worth it." The words cracked something in the crowd. Laughter bubbled bold and relieved. The courage that Clara had been grasping for finally filled the air. She straightened her shoulders, drawing strength from the stranger who stood between her and the circle of wolves. Emma reached 30. She clutched the Fox backpack tighter, her lips forming each number like a spell. She believed in him completely, and that belief threaded Daniel to the ground more firmly than any stance. Victor gestured again, furious now. The last cluster of men surged forward, a wave of black jackets meant to drown him. The wave broke on rock. Daniel moved like water flowing around stones, fluid, patient, inevitable. One went down, then another. He caught a wrist twisted until the man gasped. He swept a leg, redirected another shoulder. Each motion was efficient, nothing wasted. Chairs toppled, trays clattered, but glass stayed intact. Daniel's control was absolute. A concierge whispered a prayer to the chandelier as though it were alive, as though it too needed protection from the storm. And still Clara watched. Her pen slipped fully from her hand, forgotten, her eyes fixed on Daniel. She remembered now. A faded headline. A photograph of a man in desert dust carrying a wounded child out of a war zone. The same stillness in the eyes, the same discipline in every step. Emma reached 40. Her voice rang clear. Dad Daniel didn't turn. He didn't need to. The sound was enough to anchor him. Victor's composure shattered. He slammed his fist on a nearby table, the sound jolting even his own men. "Enough!" His voice cracked like brittle glass. "Finish him." But it was already too late. Daniel had finished it. 10 men down, then 12, then 15. The marble became a quiet graveyard of groaning egos, pride wounded deeper than flesh. Security guards, emboldened at last, edged closer, but stopped again. They measured risk. They saw what Daniel had done without breaking a sweat, and for the first time they doubted whether stepping in was wise at all. Silence spread thick and electric. Victor's ice smile was gone, replaced by the pale snarl of a man watching control slip through his fingers. And in that silence, Clara Morel took her first free breath in weeks. The silence that held the Imperial Harbor lobby was fragile, like glass stretched too thin. Then it cracked with the shuffle of polished shoes. 6 more men stepped forward at Victor's command, their jaws tight, their eyes darting nervously between the fallen bodies sprawled across the marble and the quiet man standing like a wall of stone. Daniel Callahan didn't move. He shifted his weight onto the balls of his feet, his stance relaxed, almost casual. But Clara, standing only a few paces behind, could feel the tension coil in him like wire ready to snap. She had never seen control like this, violence shaped into restraint power, carved into precision. The first attacker charged, fist cocked. Daniel sidestepped his body, brushing just enough to redirect the momentum. A palm strike to the shoulder. The man stumbled sideways, colliding with a decorative column, collapsing with a grunt. Daniel's eyes never even blinked. The second came from the left, swinging wide. Daniel dropped low, rolling his shoulder into the man's ribs. The blow wasn't bone-cracking, wasn't cruel, but it carried the kind of accuracy that stole breath and left muscles useless. The man wheezed, folding, as if his body had simply forgotten how to stand. Phones in the crowd rose higher. Every angle, every breathless moment was being recorded. Somewhere in the gallery above, Clara saw a young man in a hoodie whisper to his friend, He's trained. Seals. He moves like a seal." Emma's small voice floated from the coffee cart, steady as a metronome. 41, 42, 43. Her counting cut through the chaos, grounding Daniel a lifeline, threading from her small hands to his every motion. 2 men lunged at once, one aiming for his waist, the other at his head. Daniel pivoted, catching the first by the wrist and guiding him into the second. Their bodies tangled midair and both slammed into the floor, a tangle of limbs and curses. Daniel exhaled softly, like a man setting down a heavy tool. The crowd erupted not with screams, but with something stranger. Cheers. Nervous laughter mixed with awe. For the first time, Clara realized the tide was shifting. Fear was no longer the weapon Victor held. Admiration was seeping through the cracks. Victor's face paled. He leaned toward one of his lieutenants. "Do something," he hissed, but even the man beside him hesitated, his eyes darting toward Daniel with uncertainty. The last of the six came forward reluctantly, swinging more out of obligation than confidence. Daniel caught his arm twisted gently and guided him to his knees. No flourish, no spectacle, just control. He released him, and the man stayed there clutching his wrist, unwilling to rise. Clara's heart hammered. She should have been terrified, but instead she felt steadied. Every time Daniel placed himself between her and danger, something inside her shifted. She wasn't alone anymore. Victor snarled, "This isn't a dojo, Callahan. This is a merger. I'll have you arrested for assault." Daniel's eyes locked on him, calm but cutting. For what? Standing between a woman and a threat. He tilted his head toward the phones recording from every angle. "Go ahead, record it. I prefer accurate minutes." Laughter spilled across the lobby like a dam breaking. Even a few security guards chuckled, though they quickly bit it back. Clara exhaled, the tension in her shoulders loosening. For the first time, she believed she might walk out of this intact. Emma reached 50. Her voice rose above the murmurs. Dad Daniel didn't turn. But Clara saw the flicker in his eyes, the anchor of that single word. Victor snapped his fingers violently. "All of you, now!" The suits parted like water pulled by a tide. More men stepped forward, not 6, not 10. A wave, 20, 30 closing in from every direction. The sound of their shoes on marble was like thunder rolling in. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered, "He can't fight all of them." Someone else muttered, "No one can." But Clara felt something different. Watching Daniel settle his stance shoulders, relaxed eyes calm, she realized he had already lived through worse storms. The chandelier above quivered, scattering fractured light across his face. And Daniel Callahan, father maintenance man, former SEAL, prepared to meet the wave head-on. The marble floor quaked beneath the rush of bodies. It wasn't 6 or 12 this time, it was a tide. Dozens of men in black jackets, hired muscle flown in to look intimidating, now bearing down on one man who refused to yield. The ballroom became a funnel of noise, gasps, camera shutters, the squeal of shoes across polished stone. Daniel Callahan stood in the center, still as a lighthouse in a storm. His shoulders loosened with one slow breath, his boots shifting into that small 4-step square he had drawn earlier. A home within chaos. He had walked into gunfire firestorms, night raids, and lived. Compared to Basra, compared to the memory of brothers lost in dust. This was only Noimd. The first attacker dove. Daniel's hand rose, guided the strike past his shoulder, and redirected the man into a tumbling sprawl. A second came from behind Daniel, dropped his weight, snapped an elbow backward into the man's ribs, rolled free. A third swung a chair like a weapon. Daniel caught the edge, twisted it out of his grip, and let it clatter harmlessly aside before planting the man gently on the marble. Cameras shook as onlookers tried to capture it all. Someone shouted, "He's taking them apart one by one." The murmur rose, a mix of disbelief and raw exhilaration. Claire Morel pressed a hand to her chest. She had thought herself brave for refusing to sign Victor Kane's papers, but bravery looked different now. It looked like a man refusing to hit harder than he had to refusing to break glass or bones, even as he dismantled a wave of violence. Emma's count echoed steady, defiant. 61, 62. Her little voice almost swallowed by the roar of the crowd carried directly to Daniel's ears. Each number was an anchor, reminding him why he moved, why he endured, why he fought without rage. The marble became a dance floor. Daniel pivoted, redirected turn strikes into falls. One man staggered backward into the fountain water, splashing high. Another crashed into a silver tray cart, cutlery raining like chimes. Yet not a single bystander was touched, not a chandelier crystal shattered. Daniel kept the violence caged tightly within himself, releasing only what was necessary. Victor Kane leaned over the mezzanine railing, above his ice smile cracking into fury. He barked into his phone, "Send everyone!" Now, Bapo. The elevator doors at the far end slid open with a chime. More men spilled out, 15 then 20, swelling the tide until nearly 50 black-jacketed bodies formed a ring around Daniel. Gasps swept the lobby. This was no longer a fight. This was spectacle, gladiatorial, absurd in its scale. And still Daniel exhaled calmly. Last chance, he said, voice carrying over the chaos. Walk away. No one moved. The first charge came from his left. Daniel hooked a leg, swept the man down. Two more rushed from the right. He ducked low, seized a velvet rope stand, and spun it like a staff, driving both men back into the fountain. Water cascaded, soaking suits and marble alike. Phones caught every second. Hashtags were born in real time. Seal in the lobby. Cheers mingled with screams. Strangers who had never known Daniel Callahan were chanting his title even as he moved with the grace of someone who wanted no fame. 20 men fell. Then 30. Then 40. By the time the last brute stepped forward, hands like shovels, face twisted in reluctant dread, the ring of attackers lay groaning or crawling for exits. Daniel didn't strike. He stepped closer, eyes locked. That was enough. The brute raised his palms, retreating into the crowd. Silence washed the lobby, broken only by dripping water and the labored breaths of the defeated. Claire's throat tightened. She hadn't breathed since the first wave, and now she exhaled a long, trembling breath. Around her the mood flipped entirely. Fear had become awe-suspicion transformed into gratitude. Victor descended the staircase, face pale tie. Crooked fury simmering beneath his skin. He pointed sharply. You'll pay for this. I'll see you in handcuffs. Callahan. But the crowd didn't look at Victor anymore. Every lens, every eye, every whispered word belonged to the quiet man in work boots and a gray shirt who had just brought 50 men to their knees without losing his calm, without breaking his promise to the little girl counting numbers by the coffee cart. Clara realized with a shiver that she had witnessed not only her own salvation, but the unveiling of a secret the world would not let go. And as blue lights bled through the revolving doors, sirens slicing the night, Daniel bent down, touched Emma's fox-shaped backpack, and whispered, "Mission accomplished." By the time the sirens faded and the last officer asked for his name again, Daniel had answered the same questions 3 different ways with the same quiet patience. He signed his statement, kept his tone even, and let the hotel manager know he would clock in early tomorrow to check the fountain pumps. Then he took Emma's hand and stepped into the winter night, where a thin scrim of snow powdered the curbs and the wind carried a salty bite from the harbor. They walked the 6 blocks to their apartment in East Boston with the deliberate, unhurried stride of people who refused to let the day speed them up. Emma wore the fox backpack again, its ears bobbing against her shoulders. She swung their joined hands and asked the one question he'd been preparing to answer since marble turned to thunder. Dad, were those men bad? They made bad choices, he said. We made different ones. That's not the same as an answer, she said, frowning in the way that always made him proud. It's the truest one I've got tonight. On their floor, the hallway smelled faintly of laundry soap and boiled cabbage. Mrs. Doyle's door opened a crack as they passed. She was a retired nurse with a hummingbird voice, the type who left pumpkin bread on your mat at holidays. Daniel, oh Lord, I saw, was that you on the TV? The hotel evening, ma'am, he said gently. We're all right. Emma popped her head around his hip. We counted to 68. Mrs. Doyle made a soft sound. You come by tomorrow for cocoa, sweetheart. Your daddy can have coffee. The good kind. We'll see you, Daniel said, and nudged the door with his knuckle in thanks. She'd watched him change light bulbs in this hall and carry old boxes for tenants too proud to ask. He liked being useful in ways that didn't trend. Inside their apartment, warmth rose from the old radiators with a tin rattle. The place was modest, but meticulously kept 2 bedrooms, a small living room where a sagging sofa had learned the shape of their evenings, and a kitchen painted the pale yellow Emma called sunny butter. He hung his keys on the hook shaped like a lighthouse, slid the fox backpack onto its nail under the window, and set his dented steel mug beside the sink. That mug had crossed oceans and deserts, outlasted 3 duty stations, and now lived on coffee and cocoa with the same stubbornness it had weathered sand. Shoes, he said, and Emma was already hopping on one foot, then the other toes curling on the warm rug. He put water on to boil and set out 2 bowls, one small and polka-dotted, one plain and white. When he reached for the cupboard, his knuckles brushed an unopened envelope tucked behind a can of chickpeas. Brown window government insignia in the corner. Veterans Affairs. He slid it back into shadow. Macaroni steamed into the quiet. Emma drew astronauts in the condensation on the window, little helmets and star-speckled suits, then pressed her nose to the glass to enhance the crater details. Do astronauts count to 68? They count a lot higher, he said, stirring, and they don't stop when the numbers get scary. She considered that. Like you. He salted the water, shook his head, and looked for the words that didn't make the world bigger than she needed it to be. Like anyone who learns how. Over dinner, she told him about a girl in her class who could do cartwheels without falling, and how the music teacher played the piano like rain. He told her about a stubborn pump at the hotel that thought it was retired and a light sensor that kept confusing reflections for sunrise. They skimmed the day on purpose, leaving the undertow alone. When she lifted her fork and blinked heavy, he tapped the table once. Teeth. Pages. Blanket. Pages first, she bargained. Deal, he said, and they washed dishes together, her with the rinse sprayer, him with the towel, before migrating to the small bedroom where a strand of paper cranes hung above the bed frame like a flock that had chosen to stay. He read 3 chapters of the book. She loved the one with the girl who mapped the moon by hand and made friends with its dark. Emma listened with her cheek on his thigh and her hand curled around his shirt. She fell asleep between Crater and Capricorn, which wasn't even in the same sentence, and he smiled at the way the mind makes its own constellations when it's safe. When he rose, the apartment creaked the way old ships do settling into night. He covered her with the blanket she insisted was lucky, kissed her hairline, and turned off the lamp. In the living room, he lowered himself to the couch and let the quiet arrive. The day's footage, other people's lenses waited in a phone he did not pick up. Fame was a fire that burned fences first. He had seen too many villages learn that lesson. A knock came soft and uncertain. Daniel opened the door to find Mr. Haskins in his robe and slippers, a laundry basket balanced on his hip. Neighbor, the man said, eyes sliding past him, as if bravery gathered in corners. I don't want trouble here. Neither do I, Daniel said. It's just men who fight like that. Haskins went on, voice lowering. They don't always turn it off. I got grandkids here sometimes. Across the hall, Kendra stepped out with a bag of recycling and paused. Where she offered men who've seen war know better than anyone, why not to start one? Haskins shifted the basket. I'm just saying, I heard you, Daniel said. And I hear you too, he added toward Kendra, thanking her with his eyes. Tonight was about stopping trouble from reaching someone it shouldn't. Haskins studied him for a long second, then nodded once grudgingly, as if a jury of one had reached a provisional verdict. Okay, he said, and trudged away. When the hallway emptied, Daniel leaned his forehead against the cool frame of the door, exhaled, and let the knot behind his sternum loosen by a thread. He didn't blame fear. He'd carried his own like a pack for years. But it stung a little the way a man's usefulness can be mistaken for danger when the lights are off. In the maintenance office on the building's ground floor, he checked his schedule for the morning. A note from the Super 3A radiator, 2C faucet, roof hatch squeak. He wrote neat times beside each. The routine soothed him screws that turn valves that open problems that announce themselves in small, fixable ways. He wiped the bench clean, set out the wrench he liked best, then locked the door and went back upstairs. In the kitchen, the VA envelope had migrated with his mind. He brought it to the table, flattened it under his palm, and studied the window where his name floated above an ID number. The government had a way of addressing you like a file. He slid a thumb under the flap, then stopped. Across the room, the Fox backpack leaned against the wall like a sentry with soft ears. He placed the envelope back in the stack spine against the bread box and brewed tea instead. It didn't matter what the letter said. He knew what it would say. Evaluations, follow-ups, terms written in a language that called all scars residual. He didn't need a scale to tell him what he carried. At 10, the building slowed to a hush. At 11, the city's hum deepened, trucks exhaling on distant avenues. At midnight, he let himself remember. He had learned over the years that memory doesn't arrive in order. It comes in flashes first. The glow of a locator strobe through sand, the rubber smell of a helicopter seat, The way Chief Hart, that impossible grin, tapped 2 fingers on a bulkhead twice for luck. 2 taps Cal. 1 to go, 1 to get home. The first time Daniel realized the taps were for him and not for the ghosts. He shut off the kettle, though it had already cooled, and stood in the kitchen doorway until his eyes adjusted to darkness. The city skyline threw a soft geometry across the wall light from the financial district, cutting rectangles into paint. Somewhere out there, Victor Kane was spinning his version of the day into threads of power-weaving calls to board members and editors he bought by the inch. Men like Victor believed the world was a chessboard, and they owned the queens. He'd seen that swagger before in back rooms with bad coffee at airfields where favors changed hands like coins, and in radios that went silent when you needed them loud. His phone buzzed on the counter, skittering against the wood. He let it dance itself to stillness, unknown number, unknown number. Then Clara Morell. His thumb hovered over the screen. He pictured her in the lobby, chin set, eyes steady, voice, cutting through the panic to name a thing, not the way men like Victor named it, but the way the truth names itself. He pressed decline, then typed, "We're home. She's asleep. I'll email a formal statement in the morning. Fix those pumps at 8. He added one more line before deleting it. "You did the hardest part. You didn't sign." He erased the sentence, pocketed the phone, and smiled at himself for the softness he wasn't ready to carry in daylight. Later, maybe. When this storm had moved on, or turned, as storms do, into something else. He washed the tea mug, set it to dry, and made another lap through the apartment like a sentry who takes comfort in repetition. Window latches, secure stove. Off deadbolt, turned the small ceramic frog Emma insisted guarded the bathroom sink, aimed precisely at the door. He adjusted the frog's angle by a degree. There. Ready. On the way to bed, he paused at Emma's doorway, watching her breathe. Children sleep with a faith adults can't remember how to practice. He listened until his own heart matched her cadence, slow, even unafraid. Then he eased the door mostly shut, leaving their ritual inch the gap that let the night know it could look in, but not enter. In his room, the walls were bare except for a framed postcard of Acadia and a short shelf with 4 books, a field manual. He no longer opened a dog-eared copy of The Old Man and the Sea, a volume of Mary Oliver poems somebody once left on a table like a dare to be gentle, and Emma's first reader kept there for luck. He took the poems down, flipped to a page about wild geese, and found the line that had held him more than once. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. He closed the book and lay back. Sleep came in shallow drafts, the way it does when a day has been louder than is good for you. He woke twice at sounds, the building-made pipes knocking, elevator cables sighing, and once at the absence of sound, which is sometimes a sound of its own. When the dream finally took him whole, it was a dry dream wind in it, and the color of everything was the color of dust. Night vision green bled in at the edges of vision, humming with the battery's thin whine. A warehouse squatted in a field of broken concrete, a single bulb pulsing above a steel door like a heartbeat. He was on point, the line behind him a promise. 2 minutes, a voice in his ear said, "Heart, always heart." The plan was clean until it wasn't. This was before Emma's cranes and cups of cocoa, before the lighthouse key hook, and the yellow kitchen, before a Fox backpack made numbers into talismans. He felt the weight of his rifle, the grip worn smooth by the thousands of small decisions it had asked of him. He felt the weight of the call that would come later, the one that would tell a mother her son had done his job so well it cost him everything. He felt the weight of a man who ran when the field asked him to stay. Daniel turned in his sleep, face creasing with the memory breath catching, as if the wind had shifted and blown dust under a door he thought he'd sealed. The body keeps its calendars differently than the mind. It measures time by echoes. Before dawn, the building's boiler coughed awake. He sat up, palms to his eyes, and waited for the room to decide what century it was. When he lowered his hands, the window held a thin line of gray. East Boston was shaking out its dreams, setting coffee-leashing dogs, finding gloves. He swung his feet to the floor and stood. On the table, the VA envelope waited where he had left it. He picked it up, slid it into the drawer, and closed the drawer with the careful pressure of a man who knows some doors don't get opened without changing the weather. He poured water into the kettle, then turned it off before the switch clicked. There was no time for tea. He had radiators to soothe a fountain pump to coax a fox-eared backpack to shoulder onto a girl who would ask him later if astronauts ever get scared. They do, he would say, tying her scarf. They just keep counting. And somewhere behind the steady rituals of mourning, Basra waited patient as a scar ready to step forward from the edges of sleep and show him again how a single night can tilt an entire life. He looked down the hallway toward Emma's room and let the day catch him. He would fix the things he could fix. He would guard what needed guarding. He would, if the past insisted, open the door to the dust and name the man who ran. Outside, the light lifted itself over the water, thin and brave. He gathered his tools. Tomorrow would have a lobby again, but morning, for now, was for small repairs. The morning cracked open with the sound of gulls riding the crosswind over the harbor, their cries sharp as knives through the pale gray. Daniel buttoned his work shirt, the name patch Calder stitched neatly on the chest, and laced boots worn smooth by years of service no uniform had issued. Emma patted out with sleep, still fogging her eyes, hair tilted to one side like a bird's nest. She carried the fox-eared backpack straps dangling as if presenting evidence that, yes, school really was today, no matter how much her body protested. "You promised pancakes," she mumbled. "Saturday," he corrected gently, tucking in her scarf. "Today is cereal shaped like lies." She scrunched her nose, but let him guide her arms through the coat sleeves. At the window, the skyline blurred into mist that had rolled in from the Atlantic. Snow had melted into slick ribbons across the street, cars hissing by on wet tires. Downstairs in the maintenance office, he signed out the tool cart. The radiator in 3A groaned like an old baritone hissing steam with every breath. He tightened the valve, checked the pressure gauge, and left a neat note for the tenant explaining the repair. By the time he reached 2C, Emma had slipped her hand into his without asking. Her school was only 4 blocks, but Boston mornings in February were no place to walk alone. At the corner, Kendra waited with a travel mug and her own daughter's hand tucked into hers. She wore her EMT jacket, its reflective strips catching light. "Morning Calder," she said, eyes flicking once to Emma's scarf, once to his face. "Sleep." "Some," he said. She hesitated. "I meant what I said last night. You stopped something that could have gone very bad." He nodded, but the acknowledgement sat uneasily on his shoulders. He'd never cared for applause. Applause often came right before orders to repeat the act. At the schoolyard, Emma dropped his hand at the gate and transformed into the confident girl she rehearsed at home. She gave him a small wave, the kind meant to reassure him she'd be fine, though both knew the reassurance ran both ways. He lingered until she disappeared into the building, then let the weight of silence settle in. On the way back to the hotel, the city pulsed with headlines. News boxes screamed with still frames of last night's chaos. Luxury hotel lobby erupts. CEO nearly trampled. Unnamed maintenance man stops riot. His picture hadn't made print, but the shape of his back in grainy footage hovered like a shadow. Reporters had already camped by the entrance, bundled in scarves, cameras shouldered like weapons. The hotel manager, Mr. Klein, met him in the service corridor. He was a small man with a watch that glittered louder than his voice. "Calder. Just keep your head down. Fix the pump, stay out of the lobby. And if anyone asks, you were never there last night." "I was there," Daniel said evenly. "I mean for press. Legal wants no liability." "Clear." Daniel inclined his head. He'd learned long ago the difference between being heard and being agreed with. He wheeled the cart toward the fountain where the water sputtered in uneven arcs. He knelt, tools arranged with soldierly precision, and let muscle memory take over. Each bolt he turned steadied the rhythm in his chest. But he wasn't alone for long. "Mr. Calder." The voice belonged to Clara Morell. She stood at the edge of the maintenance zone, in a slate coat hair pinned back, gaze unwavering. She wasn't supposed to be here. CEOs like her sent assistants. Yet she had come herself, ignoring the sidelong looks of staff who whispered as she passed. He rose slowly, wiping his hands. "Ms. Morell, I wanted to thank you, not as a headline, as a person who might have been crushed if you hadn't acted." "Glad you're safe," he said, tone clipped but not unkind. Her eyes narrowed slightly, studying the calm way he spoke. "Do you know who those men were?" "Men making bad choices," he said. She shook her head. "Not just men. Kane had them follow me. He's trying to force a merger through intimidation. What happened last night wasn't random. Daniel leaned against the cart, folding his arms. The name landed like a stone. Victor Kane. He'd heard it in barracks over satellite calls attached to rumors of contracts signed in desert heat. Men like Kane lived in the shadows between corporations and governments, profiting from both. "You should tell the police," Daniel said. "I did," she replied. "But men like Kane buy silence as easily as they buy suits. I need people who won't look away." He didn't answer immediately. He had promised himself after Basra that he would never again enlist in another war, foreign or domestic, where the lines blurred until good men went missing. But Clara's eyes held the same resolve he remembered from leaders who refused to abandon their teams. She wasn't asking for a savior. She was asking for someone to stand in the fire beside her. "I'm a janitor now," he said, finally gesturing at the wrench. Her mouth curved into something between a smile and disbelief. "No, Mr. Calder." "You're not." Before he could reply, the radio on her hip crackled with a driver's voice calling her to a waiting car. She gave him a final look. One part gratitude, one part plea, and left. He returned to the pump, but the wrench felt heavier in his hands as if memory had filled it with sand. By noon, the fountain gurgled clear and smooth. Klein signed the work order without looking up. Daniel clocked out, collected Emma from school, and walked her home past the corner bodega where the owner slipped her a free apple. The city seemed normal again, but in every shadow he felt the tremor of something gathering. That night, after Emma drifted into dreams beneath her string of paper cranes, Daniel opened the VA envelope at last. The letter inside confirmed what he already knew: residual effects of combat deployment. Further evaluation recommended. No mention of courage, no acknowledgement of nights spent keeping men alive by counting seconds no one else could count. Just clinical lines stacked in bureaucratic gray. He folded the letter, slid it beneath the field manual, and sat staring at the wall until the hum of the radiator became a lullaby of its own. Outside, snow began again drifting across the streets, where headlines still burned with his shadow. And somewhere in the dark, Victor Kane read those same lines of print and circled a name he hadn't expected to learn. The storm thickened overnight, leaving Boston streets glazed in ice. By morning, the city groaned under the strain. Sirens echoed down frozen avenues, buses stalled at intersections, and neighbors cursed the snowplows that hadn't come. Daniel stood at the window, mug of coffee cooling in his hands, watching the world outside grind itself into another battle with the weather. Emma shuffled in wearing mismatched socks and a paper crown she'd made at school. "It's pajama day," she announced proudly, as if the crown was part of the uniform. He crouched to adjust the scarf around her neck. "Pajama day doesn't mean frostbite day. Coat stays on." She grinned and let him zip it up, though she muttered something about ruining the look. When he walked her to school, the frost glittered like glass shards underfoot. Other parents huddled in scarves, but Daniel walked tall, scanning corners with a gaze that never truly rested. The habit wasn't something he could unlearn. He kissed Emma's forehead at the gate, then turned back toward the hotel, the sound of kids' laughter fading like echoes of another life. Inside the lobby, murmurs rippled through staff. A cluster of reporters lingered outside, their breath fogging the glass. Klein's voice cut sharp from behind the reception desk. "Ignore them." No comments. "Anyone who talks is out." Daniel slipped into the service corridor, but before he could reach the boiler room, a figure blocked the hall. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a tailored overcoat dusted with snow, Victor Kane. His presence filled the narrow passage the way a storm front fills the sky. "You're Calder," Kane said, voice calm, almost casual. The man who thinks swinging a mop and a fist makes him relevant. Daniel didn't flinch. He leaned on his tool cart. "You lost something in the lobby last night. Your men." Kane's smile was thin, brittle. "I don't lose. I regroup. And you've stepped into a story you don't understand." Daniel met his gaze evenly. "I understand men like you." For a moment, silence stretched taut between them, broken only by the hum of fluorescent lights. Then Kane leaned closer. "You'll find I don't scare as easily as the fools who used to point guns in your desert. I know exactly who you are, Calder. Navy SEAL. Honorably discharged, decorated. But men like you don't stay retired. They just wait for the right trigger." Daniel's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed level. This isn't your battlefield. Leave the woman alone. Kane's eyes flickered cold and calculating. That woman Clara Morell is standing in the way of progress. You saved her once. You won't save her twice. And with that, Kane turned and strode away, shoes echoing down the hall. Daniel stood still, pulse steady but heavy like a drumbeat in his throat. He knew a threat when he heard one, and Kane's wasn't a bluff. Hours later, while fixing a flickering chandelier in the ballroom, Daniel caught sight of Clara again. She was meeting with lawyers, her hands moving in clipped gestures, her voice steel wrapped in silk. When she noticed him high on the ladder, their eyes met. For a second, her guarded expression softened, but he looked away quickly, focusing on the wiring. The more distance he kept, the safer Emma would be. Yet the city had other plans. That evening, as Daniel and Emma left the bodega with a bag of groceries, headlights flared too bright in the alley. A black SUV rolled slow tires, crunching ice windows tinted dark. Daniel felt the hair rise on the back of his neck. He shifted Emma behind him, scanning the shadows. The SUV paused, then eased away into the storm, leaving only exhaust hanging in the air like smoke after gunfire. Emma tugged his sleeve. "Dad, why were you looking at them like that?" He forced his voice calm, just making sure they weren't lost. But his heart knew better. Kane's men had marked them. The battlefield had followed him home. Back in the apartment, Emma curled on the couch with her homework pencil tapping against the page. Daniel sat at the table map of Boston spread out before him. He traced routes from the hotel to the school, circling blind corners, alleys, choke points. Old instincts resurfaced patterns of surveillance, extraction, defense. He hated himself for drawing them, but he hated the thought of Emma in Kane's crosshairs more. A knock at the door startled him. He slipped the map beneath a newspaper and opened it a crack. Kendra stood there, cheeks flushed from the cold, her EMT bag slung over one shoulder. "Daniel," she whispered urgently. "Word at the station is that Kane has men watching the hotel. And Clara, she's not backing down. Whatever's coming, it's bigger than last night. You need to be careful." Emma peeked from the couch. Daniel forced a smile. "Everything's fine. Go finish your crown project." She nodded and disappeared into her room. Then he turned back to Kendra, voice low. "If Kane's circling, he won't stop. And if Clara keeps standing tall, he'll hit harder." Kendra's eyes searched his. "And you? What are you going to do?" Daniel looked around the small apartment. Emma's crayons on the table, the paper cranes strung by the window, the boots drying near the heater. He wanted nothing more than to be just a father, a man fixing radiators. But the shadow of war had stepped into his hallway, and ignoring it would only put Emma closer to the line of fire. His answer came slow, like a tide creeping in. "I'll do what I've always done. Protect the ones who can't fight back." Kendra nodded, though worry clouded her expression. Outside, the storm roared against the glass, rattling the panes. Inside, Daniel felt the storm of another kind gathering, one that would not blow past by morning but demand a reckoning. The morning broke with a pale sun over the harbor light bleeding through gray clouds that seemed stitched together by the wind. Boston felt like it was holding its breath, as if the city knew something dark was about to unfold. Daniel walked Emma to school again, but this time his eyes darted to every passing car, every man loitering on the corner. The SUV from the night before haunted his thoughts. He squeezed Emma's hand a little tighter, and she noticed. "Dad, you're walking fast," she said, her little legs rushing to keep up. He slowed, forcing a smile. "Just cold. Let's get you inside before we both freeze." When she disappeared through the school doors, he lingered outside longer than usual, scanning the street. He wasn't paranoid. He was prepared. Years of training told him when danger was circling, and now the whispers of Kane's shadow stretched through every alley. At the hotel, Clara was already deep in a board meeting. Through the glass walls of the conference room, Daniel saw her pacing papers spread across the table, lawyers nodding nervously. Her voice carried sharp, uncompromising. "We don't bend to threats," she declared, slamming her palm down on the table. "If Kane wants a war, he'll find I don't scare easy." Daniel tightened the wrench in his hand, standing in the maintenance corridor just outside. He respected her fire, but the soldier in him knew fire could also draw bullets. Later that day, Clara stepped into the service hall, catching sight of Daniel tinkering with a faulty radiator. She paused, her voice softer now. "Calder?" she said, using his last name, the way officers used to on the field. Why are you still here? I know Kane spoke to you. Daniel straightened slowly, wiping his hands on a rag. I'm here because the job needs doing. She narrowed her eyes. You're not a man who hides behind boiler rooms. You're watching. For me. Why? He met her gaze evenly, though his pulse quickened. Because men like Kane don't fight fair, and because last night could have gone a lot worse. For the first time, Clara's expression cracked. You think he'll come after me again? Daniel didn't answer, but the silence was loud enough. That evening, the hotel was hosting a gala for donors. The lobby shimmered with chandeliers, and guests in sequined gowns and tailored tuxedos floated through like figures in a dream. Clara was there, regal, in a midnight blue dress, her chin lifted in defiance of the wolves snapping at her heels. Daniel stayed in the shadows, stationed near the back as part of maintenance. But his eyes were fixed on every unfamiliar face, every hand that lingered too close to a pocket. Halfway through the night, the first sign came. A man in a catering uniform carried a tray that sagged oddly on one side. His eyes flicked toward Clara too often. Daniel felt the prickle of danger and moved without thinking. He intercepted the waiter near the ballroom entrance, bumping into him hard enough that the tray clattered. Beneath the silver lids, instead of champagne glasses, a handgun gleamed. Gasps rose from nearby guests. Before the man could react, Daniel's fist connected with his jaw. The weapon skittered across the floor as security rushed in. But in the chaos, Daniel spotted more movement. 3 men rising from tables, their coats shifting unnaturally heavy. Down he barked, his voice slicing through the music and chatter. Guests screamed, diving for cover as the ballroom exploded into panic. Clara froze for a split second, eyes locked on Daniel. He vaulted a table, grabbing the nearest attacker and slamming him into a marble pillar. Glass shattered, champagne spraying like rain. Another man lunged, knife flashing. Daniel twisted, using the momentum to flip him over, the banquet table dishes clattering to the floor. A third raised a pistol. Daniel grabbed a chair and hurled at the wood, splintering as it knocked the gun from his hand. The room pulsed with chaos, people crying, shoes slipping on broken glass, security shouting. Clara crouched behind the podium, heart racing as she watched Daniel move with precision, every strike efficient, every motion controlled. This wasn't just a janitor. This was a soldier trained for storms like this. By the time the last attacker was pinned, the gala was ruined. Guests streamed out, reporters already shoving cameras against the glass doors outside. Security dragged the men away, but Daniel didn't wait for applause. He checked the exits, then strode to Clara. You need to leave now, he said firmly. Clara, trembling but resolute, shook her head. No. If I run, he wins. Daniel leaned closer, his voice low and hard. If you don't, you'll be dead before sunrise. And Kane will still win. For a long moment, her eyes searched his. Then reluctantly, she nodded. Minutes later, they slipped through the service corridor, Daniel leading her past the boiler rooms and out into the icy night. Snowflakes spun in the air like ash. Where are you taking me? Clara whispered. Somewhere Kane won't look. First, Daniel replied, scanning the darkened street. But make no mistake, Clara, tonight was just the opening move. He's not done, and neither am I. The truth lay between them like a drawn blade. Kane had declared war, and Daniel Calder, reluctant or not, had just stepped back onto the battlefield. The streets of Boston felt different the next morning, as if the city itself had sensed the shift. Sirens still echoed from the night before, reporters' vans still parked outside the hotel, but inside the safe house on the edge of Southie, a cold silence hung between Daniel and Clara. Daniel had brought her here, a rundown brick townhouse owned by a friend from his Navy days. The place smelled faintly of old wood and coffee grounds, but it was secure, no cameras, no obvious entrances, blind spots, only someone like Daniel would think to use. Clara paced the narrow living room, still in last night's dress, her heels abandoned by the door. She was furious at Kane, at the humiliation, at herself. Do you understand what this means? She snapped, turning on Daniel. My company is all over the news. The board is probably calling for my resignation as we speak. If Kane wanted to ruin me, congratulations, he's halfway there. Daniel leaned against the window frame, arms crossed. His voice was calm but unyielding. Better ruined than buried. Her eyes flashed. That's easy for you to say. You don't have thousands of employees depending on you. He met her glare without flinching. And Emma depends on me. That's why I'm not letting Kane get close enough to finish the job. At the mention of his daughter, Clara's anger faltered. She sank onto the couch, pressing her hands to her face. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. "You could walk away. Let me deal with Kane on my own. Why put your life on the line?" Daniel hesitated, his jaw tightening. He thought of nights alone after deployments of Emma asking about her mother of promises he couldn't keep. "Because some fights find you whether you want them or not," he said finally. "And because if I don't, Kane will keep coming. And next time, he won't miss." A beat of silence passed. Clara lowered her hands, studying him as if seeing him fully for the first time. "You're not just a janitor," she said softly. Daniel looked away. "No." The moment cracked when the burner phone in Daniel's pocket buzzed. He answered, his voice low. "Yeah." A gruff voice came through. "Calder. It's Reese. Saw the mess on TV. That was Kane's crew, no doubt. Listen, you need to hit first. Otherwise, he'll keep picking at you until there's nothing left." Daniel's shoulders tensed. Reese had been with him in Fallujah, a man who lived for action, never afraid of a fight. "I'm not dragging Emma into this," Daniel said. "You already did," Reese replied flatly. "If Kane knows you're in the picture, she's a target. You need to end it before he decides to go through her." The line went dead, leaving Daniel with the icy echo of truth. That night, Clara changed into borrowed clothes from Daniel's friend's wife. Jeans, a thick sweater, boots. She sat across from him at the scarred wooden table, the light of a single lamp casting shadows on the walls. "You're planning something," she said. Daniel didn't deny it. "Kane has a warehouse near the docks. His crew runs guns and cash out of there. If I hit it, I can send a message." Clara frowned, folding her arms. "You think you can walk into his stronghold and just dismantle it alone?" Daniel's mouth quirked in something almost like a smile. "I won't be alone. I'll have 40 angry memories of Kane to keep me company." Clara shook her head, frustration in her voice. "You're insane." "Maybe," he said quietly. "But I'm also the only thing standing between him and you." The air grew thick with unspoken words. Clara wanted to argue, but part of her, the part that had seen him move like a storm at the gala, knew he wasn't wrong. Later, when the house was dark, Daniel sat awake by the window, the weight of his choices pressing against him. His reflection stared back at him in the glass-scarred tired. A man pulled into a fight he thought he'd left behind. He reached into his bag, pulling out a folded photograph of Emma. She was grinning, her hair wild in the summer wind, holding a melting ice cream cone. "I'll keep you safe," he murmured, almost a vow. Outside, a car slowed as it passed the townhouse. Daniel's hand went instantly to the pistol at his side. He watched until the headlights disappeared, his pulse steady but heavy. Kane's reach was growing closer, and the storm was only beginning. By noon the next day, the Imperial Harbor felt like a shaken snow globe light drifting through glass. Everything unsettled, familiar shapes suspended in a glittering storm. Trucks had unloaded staging banners and screens all morning for Tech Horizons, the conference that turned Boston into a magnet each winter for men who measured their worth in valuations and exits. The grand ballroom had been dressed like a promise, brass trusses spotlights a projection wall the size of a city bus. Daniel moved along the catwalk above it all with a coil of cable on his shoulder and a flashlight clenched between his teeth. His maintenance badge still read Calder, a name the hotel's HR had on file since an earlier paperwork tangle. It was safer that way, the alias blurred lines that attention kept trying to sharpen. He checked a loose clamp, tightened a safety line, and let his eyes map entrances, exits, blind corners. You could dress a room however you liked. It stayed a room, geometry angles, pressure points. Down on the floor, a small army of PR handlers rehearsed the choreography. Clara Morell would be invited on stage by Tech Horizons organizers to receive an Industry Leadership Award. Victor Kane, sponsor of this year's keynote, would present her with a tasteful acrylic plaque and a velvet-lined pen. Cameras would capture her smiling acceptance. The pen would sign the papers beneath. Sleight of hand writ corporate. Daniel climbed down, boots runging against the ladder in a steady rhythm. He wiped his palms on his utility pants and radioed a test to the lighting op. Grid B stable. Throw a pan sweep. The lights obeyed, gliding across empty chairs like stadium lights searching for a play. He could feel Kane in the building without seeing him, the way animals sense a storm's barometric dip. The air changed, the currents turned thin and metallic. He texted Kendra. Emma pickup at 3. Keep the route long. 2 extra turns. Her reply came quick. Copy. Box backpack already packed. We're good. He pocketed the phone, adjusted the angle of a follow spot, then made for the service hallway. A tech in a headset nearly collided with him at the corner. Hey Calder, right? Can you secure the backstage door? We've got VIPs sneaking smokes and it's messing with alarms. On it, he said, and locked the latch with a flick that felt more like muscle memory than maintenance. The lobby swelled with arrivals' heels ticking on marble cologne, fogging the air badges swinging. The chandelier trembled as if it remembered last time and wanted to hide. Photographers staked out sight lines near the staircase. Reporters rehearsed questions like bullets they'd shoot into the scrum. Clara, any comment on last night's incident? Clara, will you step down? Clara, rumor says a buyout. Clara arrived in a charcoal suit that caught the light like water. She paused at the edge of the red carpet, glanced up to the balcony where Daniel was checking a speaker mount, and gave the smallest nod. Not a signal, a recognition. She walked past the cameras without a smile. Victor stood at the far end of the ballroom stage, conferring with a pair of publicists whose legal pads were already full of sketched talking points. His suit was navy and predatory. A moderator from the conference, a man with the unshakable grin of someone who loved microphones, practiced his opening patter. And now a moment we've all been waiting for. Collaboration over confrontation. Vision over volatility. Daniel ghosted the back wall, counting security details. Some were hotel, some conference, a few. Kane's hired eyes that moved in short, predatory arcs and kept their hands close to their belts. He didn't recognize faces, but the posture gave them away too coiled, waiting for signals rather than trouble. He picked a point 3 feet off the stage where the curtain dipped and stood there, partly shadow, partly structural column. He let his breath settle into a pattern he could keep for hours if he had to. He'd kept worse patterns longer. When the house lights dimmed, something like theater but not art began. The moderator ambled out into the spotlight to a rush of applause. Palms slapped together because that is what palms do when the room asks them to. He introduced Victor with words like strategic, transformational, visionary, and the audience applauded harder because money clapped first. Victor took the mic and swallowed the room with a smile. Our industry faces a choice, he said, voice modulated to sound humble and decisive at once. Consolidate or be consumed. We've all watched the headlines, we've all felt the volatility, but leadership means knowing when to join forces, which is why it's my honor to acknowledge a peer who has built something remarkable. Today we turn a page. A murmur rippled through the chairs. Clara's jaw clenched. The moderator gestured to the wings. Please welcome Clara Morell. Clara stepped into the light to a polite ovation and the full hungry attention of 100 cameras. She didn't approach the acrylic podium, she stopped 2 steps to the left of it, where the shadows could still touch her feet. Victor held out the plaque and the velvet pen as if officiating a wedding. Clara, he said, smiling like a man bestowing a kingdom, we're thrilled to formalize what the market already knows, that we're better together. Is that what we're calling coercion now? She asked, her voice even. Her words barely left a mark on his smile. Let's not quibble with language, he murmured, turning to the crowd. Shareholders want certainty. From the back someone shouted, Do you accept? The moderator leaned in Ms. Morell for the record. And that was the cue. 2 men in catering whites peeled off from stage right. One drifted toward the house left stairs. Another tightened his grip on a tray that sagged, wrong chrome lid rattling like a concealed weight. Daniel cut the distance in 4 strides. His hand reached the tray first, tipping the lid up a 1/4 inch enough to see matte black where champagne should have been. He let the lid fall, caught the man's wrist, and turned it with the kind of measured pressure that convinced the bones to help you. The pistol clattered under the riser. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. The other caterer lunged. Daniel pivoted shoulder down and met him with a body block that moved him into the curtain rather than the crowd. Fabric swallowed him. Daniel placed him on the floor like a pallet. The first wave of panic rolled shallow and wide, a skid of chair legs, whispers, turning brittle. The second wave rose behind it. Phones came up. Heads craned, the whisper became, That's him. Victor's smile thinned. Security? He snapped, but he wasn't sure which team he meant. The conference guards hesitated. The hotel guards looked to their captain. Kane's men looked to Kane. Daniel used the pause. He came up the steps and stood between Clara and the pen. He didn't touch her. He didn't need to. He simply placed his body in the space violence most often tried to enter. In my experience, Daniel said, voice carrying without effort, when a man brings a velvet pen to a fight, the ink's already mixed. A laugh burst from somewhere it wasn't supposed to, a raw, grateful sound. The moderator blinked at the teleprompter like it could rescue him. Victor cut the mic with a gesture and switched to his own voice, which was far colder. You don't get to rewrite this, Calder. Daniel watched the man's mouth form his alias, the way a snake tests the air with its tongue. You keep calling me a janitor, he said. You should try talking to one sometime. They clean up after messes men like you design. Victor's hand twitched a signal. Two of his men moved. Daniel raised one hand, palm out, and said, don't. He didn't make it a threat. He made it a forecast. They stopped for the same reason sailors stop when the barometer drops. Clara found his profile in the sidelight and saw something she hadn't fully seen before. He wasn't chasing this moment. He was enduring it. He would rather have been upstairs with a wrench and a humming pump, but he stood where he was needed. Applause, slow and sincere, began in the balcony. It wasn't for the spectacle. It was for the fact of a line drawn. More phones lifted. The algorithm was already chewing, spitting out hashtags. Hashtag seal nth lobby rebloomed like a second bloom after a hard frost. Clips from the chandelier fight merged with new angles of Daniel lifting the chrome lid and stopping a gun from becoming a headline. In the swell, a hotel director, calm, gray-suited, practiced in emergencies, stepped forward to seize control of the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, we're taking a brief pause to address a security concern. Please remain seated. Victor overrode her. No pauses. Miss Morell has an announcement. Clara didn't wait for permission. I do, she said. Victor Kane has used intimidation, private muscle, and falsified narratives to force a merger I've refused on principle. He has endangered guests at this hotel twice in 24 hours. Her voice didn't shake. I won't sign anything under duress, and I won't be silent while he buys compliance. The room went very still. Victor set the plaque down. Careful, he said softly, for her alone. You don't know the rooms I can make you walk into. Daniel's head tilted just a fraction, enough to hear, enough to remember a warehouse door in another country, another lifetime light flickering over steel. Sirens bled in from the street. Blue washed the ceiling once, twice. The hotel director raised both hands, not to soothe, but to slow. Security moved in measured lines, not a swarm now, but a method. The pistol under the riser was bagged. The caterers who weren't caterers were cuffed. A reporter shouted from row 4, voice hot, with the thrill of a scoop. Mr. Kane. Are those your men? Victor's smile returned counterfeit as a gold watch from a folding table. I sponsor security for many events, he said smoothly. If there were bad actors, we're all victims. Clara's laugh was almost tender with disbelief. You set the fire and sell the water, cameras swung to Daniel. Name someone yelled. Are you a SEAL? Another demanded. Why are you here? The last one sounded just curious enough to be human. Daniel weighed the harm of answers. He gave them none. Aisles, he said instead, gesturing the shortest path to safety for those who could use guidance. People listened because the body listens when it hears a tone that has been used before in rooms where listening kept people alive. As the ballroom emptied to the flutter of credentials and the thrum of live streams, Victor stepped close enough that Daniel could smell the mint on his breath. You can't keep standing between me and the future Callahan. The shift was so small most missed it. Callahan. Not Calder. A name meant for a knife. Daniel didn't give him the satisfaction of a flinch. It's not the future you're after, he said. It's the receipt. Clara touched Daniel's sleeve, the first contact she had allowed herself. Walk with me. It was not a question. They exited not through the wings, not through the glamour of hallways built for handshakes and photos. They took the service corridor, the narrow artery with peeling paint, and a floor that remembered every mop it ever met. Somewhere behind them, applause had restarted, thin but real. Somewhere ahead, police would ask careful questions, and lawyers would write careful answers. In the corridor where the smell of coffee filters and dust became something nearly like home, Clara stopped. For a beat, they were just two people in bad light. "Thank you," she said. He almost said you did the hardest part, the phrase that had hovered unsent in last night's unsent text. Instead, he nodded. "You didn't sign." Her mouth quirked. "You knew I wouldn't." "I hoped," he said. From the loading dock, horns bleated, radios crackled. Their reprieve ended. "This doesn't stop him," Clara murmured. "No," Daniel said, "but it puts light on his hands." He looked out at the blur of blue and red reflecting off wet pavement. He hates light. Phones buzzed in pockets up and down the hall. On screens, the clip played again, the chrome lid tipping the pistol, glinting the man in the gray maintenance shirt moving the way water moves when a rock refuses to be moved. In comment threads, strangers argued about what a hero is. In boardrooms, men recalculated risk. In a quiet apartment across town, a fox-eared backpack leaned against a chair, and a little girl worked a math worksheet without knowing that men stronger than her father had decided he should not be allowed to keep choosing small good things over grand terrible ones. Daniel slid his badge into his pocket, the alias face down. He would keep moving until the light was pointed where it needed to be. He would keep breathing in squares of 4 steps when the room tried to spin. And when Clara lifted her chin and stepped back into the brightness, he stepped with her. Not to stand in front of her, but to stand exactly where the first and last blows tended to land. Outside, the snowflakes recommenced soft as ash. Inside, the story tilted again. And far beyond the chandeliers and cameras, the city's arteries carried a new rumor that the janitor had a name, that the man had a past, and that both were about to collide with a predator's future. The harbor lay draped in fog, the kind that clung to the skin and muffled every sound. Streetlights glowed dimly halos in the mist, while the steady lapping of water against the pylons carried a rhythm both calming and tense. Daniel moved like a shadow along the pier, his boots silent on the slick wood. Beside him, Clara hugged her coat tighter. She hated being here, hated the risk, but Daniel had been unmovable. "If you want Kane gone, this is where it starts," he had told her. And now she stood in the belly of the city's underworld, following a man who carried war in his bones. Ahead, a warehouse loomed, rust-stained metal doors, cracked windows, patched with plywood, a flickering bulb over the side entrance. Trucks were parked nearby, engines still warm, and Daniel knew what that meant. The crew was inside, moving shipments, counting cash, trusting the fog to guard them. Daniel turned, his face set like stone. "Stay close. Don't make a sound. If anything happens, you run." Clara bristled. "You think I'll just abandon you?" "Yes," he said flatly, "because I'm not dying to protect someone who refuses to save herself." Their eyes locked, the air between them taut. She wanted to argue, but the fire in his gaze burned away her defiance. She nodded once, swallowing hard. Daniel slipped to the side door, tools in hand. In seconds, the lock gave way with a quiet snap. He pushed the door open just enough to slip inside, the scent of oil and gunpowder hitting him instantly. Inside, the warehouse was alive with voices. Crates stacked like walls, the metallic clatter of rifles being unpacked, men laughing in low, mean tones. A radio crackled somewhere, playing a faint country tune out of tune with the violence of the place. Daniel crouched, every step deliberate. Clara followed, her breath shallow, heart hammering. She felt like she was intruding on something primal, a predator's den where one wrong sound could end them both. From the shadows, Daniel scanned the room. A dozen men at least, maybe more. They were armed, relaxed, but careless. On the far side, Kane's second-in-command, Doyle, a brute with a scar slicing across his cheek, counted stacks of bills, his voice carrying over the others. "We moved the next shipment by dawn. Kane wants no mistakes this time." Clara's stomach tightened at the name, the casual way it rolled off Doyle's tongue. Kane wasn't just a threat. He was a shadow lingering over every corner of her life. Daniel leaned toward her, whispering so low she barely caught it. "This is where it hurts him. No men, no shipments, no money. Kane bleeds from here." Before she could answer, a guard turned his flashlight beam, slicing dangerously close. Daniel moved faster than thought, seizing the man from behind one arm, crushing his throat, while the other eased the flashlight to the floor. A muffled struggle, then silence. The man sagged unconscious. Daniel dragged him into the dark eyes, flicking back to Clara. She stared, her lips parting. Not just a fighter, this man was precision itself honed to a razor's edge. Daniel's plan unfolded like clockwork. One by one, he dismantled Kane's operation from the shadows. He slipped behind crates, disabling weapons, scattering cash-cutting fuel lines. Each strike was invisible, but its impact was thunder. Then a sound shattered the silence, a bottle knocked loose by Clara's boot rolling across the floor. Heads turned, shouts rang out. Daniel's head snapped toward her, fury flashing across his face, but there was no time to scold. Men surged forward, guns raised. Down, Daniel barked, pulling Clara to the ground, just as bullets tore through the crates. Splinters rained like hail, the air filled with the metallic sting of gunfire. Daniel rolled, returned fire, 2 men dropping before they hit the ground. Chaos erupted. Doyle roared, overturning a table, his scar twisting with rage. "It's him, Calder's here." Daniel's pulse steadied. He had been found. Yes, but the war had already begun. Clara crawled behind cover, her hands trembling, tears stinging her eyes. She wanted to scream, to flee, but something in her, some stubborn shard of pride, kept her rooted. Watching Daniel move was like watching a storm take form, lethal, unstoppable, every strike a reminder of why Kane feared him. Daniel weaved through the chaos, his body remembering battles long past. He disarmed one thug with a twist, slammed another into the steel beams until his breath left in a rush. Gunfire echoed, but Daniel always seemed a step ahead, moving with a grace that belied the violence. But there were too many, and Kane's men, once scattered, were rallying. Doyle bellowed orders, his voice rising above the din. "Trap him! Box him in!" "In." Daniel ducked behind a crate, reloading. His chest heaved, but his eyes stayed cold, focused. Clara, from her crouched corner, whispered his name. "Daniel." He looked at her just for a second, and in his gaze she saw something unexpected. Not fear, not anger, but resolve. "This doesn't end tonight," he said, voice low but certain. "It ends when Kane's on the ground." And then he was gone again, surging forward into the heart of the fight as the warehouse exploded into war. The warehouse had become a battlefield, its metal walls amplifying every gunshot until it sounded like thunder trapped in a cage. Sparks flew as bullets ricocheted off steel beams, crates shattered into splinters, and the acrid scent of smoke mixed with the heavy tang of oil. Daniel moved with lethal economy. Years of training as a SEAL had etched into his body a rhythm that never faltered, even under fire. He ducked low, fired twice, then rolled behind cover before Doyle's men could pin him down. One thug screamed, clutching his thigh. Another collapsed against the crates with a wet groan. But there were too many. For every man Daniel dropped, 2 more surged forward. Clara pressed herself against a stack of barrels, the cold metal biting into her back. Her chest rose and fell in sharp, shallow breaths, panic threatening to break her. Through the haze she caught flashes of Daniel, his silhouette darting through the fog of gunfire, the flex of his shoulders as he struck the precision in every move. And then Doyle's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Light it up!" 2 men scrambled toward the gas canisters near the trucks. Clara's stomach plummeted. She didn't need Daniel to explain if they ignited those tanks, the whole place would become an inferno. "Daniel!" She screamed before she could stop herself. He turned instantly, saw what she had seen, his eyes locked on hers, sharp, commanding. "Stay down!" He sprinted across the open floor, gunfire chasing his heels. He tackled the first man before the lighter sparked, slamming his head against the concrete with brutal force. The second managed to flick his lighter, once flames spitting alive, until Daniel drove his knife into the man's wrist, the lighter clattering harmlessly away. But the distraction cost him. Doyle's massive frame crashed into Daniel from behind, sending both men sprawling. Doyle was a bear of a man, all brute force and fury, and he had been waiting for this moment. He roared, fists pounding, trying to crush the life from Daniel with raw strength. Daniel gritted his teeth, blocking, countering, but Doyle's weight pressed like a vice. "You should have stayed in the shadows," Calder Doyle growled. Spittle flying. "Kane's gonna break you slow." Daniel drove his knee upward, catching Doyle in the ribs, rolling free just enough to breathe. "Tell Kane," he rasped, "I don't break." They clashed again, steel against stone, trading blows that echoed louder than the gunfire. Daniel struck with precision, Doyle with power. Around them, the remaining men circled, watching, hesitant to intervene. This was more than a fight, it was dominance on display. Clara's nails dug into her palms as she watched. Every instinct screamed to run to hide, but she couldn't tear her eyes away. Daniel wasn't just fighting Doyle, he was holding back the tide, standing between her and a world that wanted her destroyed. And then with a sudden surge, Doyle wrapped his arm around Daniel's neck, dragging him into a chokehold. Daniel's vision swam the world, narrowing, Doyle's laughter booming in his ear. "Not so tough now, are you, Seal?" Clara's heart lurched. Without thinking, she grabbed a broken length of pipe lying nearby. Her hands shook, but she raised it high and swung with everything she had. The pipe connected with a sickening crack against Doyle's shoulder. He roared, loosening his grip just enough for Daniel to drive his elbow into his gut and twist free. Daniel didn't waste the opening. He slammed Doyle against a steel beam, fists a blur until the scarred man slumped, dazed and broken to the floor. The room fell silent, the gang's bravado bleeding out of them as they saw their enforcer defeated. Daniel, chest-heaving, turned to Clara. She still held the pipe, trembling eyes wide. For a moment they simply stared at each other, both stunned by what she had done. Then shouts rose outside. Engines revved, headlights sliced through the warehouse windows. Reinforcements. Daniel cursed under his breath. "We're out of time." He grabbed Clara's hand, pulling her toward the back exit. But Doyle, bloodied and gasping, still had enough venom left to snarl after them. "Kane knows now, Calder. He knows you're with her, and when he comes, not even you will stop him." The words chased them into the night, into the fog-thick harbor where escape was a fragile thread. Clara stumbled beside him, fear clawing at her throat. "He's right, isn't he? Kane won't stop until one of us is dead." Daniel glanced at her jaw-set eyes, burning with a resolve that chilled and steadied her all at once. "Then we make sure it's him." The fog swallowed their footsteps, but behind them the city stirred the echo of war, spreading faster than either of them could contain. The harbor night was thick with mist, the kind that clung to the skin and muffled every sound until the world felt wrapped in gauze. Clara stumbled across the uneven planks of the pier, her heels clicking like nervous heartbeats. Daniel's grip on her hand was firm, guiding her with the sure-footedness of a man who'd moved through darker places than this. Behind them, the warehouse roared alive again, shouts, engines, the crack of weapons being reloaded. Doyle's men weren't broken, they were regrouping. "Keep moving." Daniel urged, his voice low-clipped. His chest still rose hard from the fight, but his eyes scanned the harbor like a hawk's, every shadow a possible threat. "I can't." Clara's breath came in sharp gasps. Her lungs burned from smoke and fear. "I can't run anymore." Daniel pulled her close, pressing her against the cold siding of a storage shed. The wooden board smelled of salt and mildew. He leaned in close enough that she could see the sweat streaking his brow, the tiny scar above his lip, the storm locked in his gaze. "You can," he said firmly, "because stopping means dying. Do you trust me?" Clara hesitated, but the answer rose unbidden raw. "Yes." A faint smile, quick gone, flickered across his lips. "Then breathe. Follow my lead." The low rumble of motorcycle engines rolled through the fog, and suddenly headlights slashed the mist. Figures emerged, more men clad in leather, their patches catching the weak glow. 50, maybe more. The roar of the Hells Angels. Clara froze. "Oh, God." Daniel's jaw tightened. His fingers slid to the knife strapped at his thigh, then to the pistol at his waist, counting his dwindling options. 50 against 1. Even a seal couldn't hold that ground forever. The gang spread out, boots crunching over gravel, weapons glinting. At their center stood a tall, lean man in a black coat, his face, angular eyes cold as winter stone. "Kane." Clara's breath snagged in her throat. She had seen his picture in dossiers and security briefings she thought were paranoia. But in person, the menace radiating off him was suffocating. He stepped forward, his voice, carrying like steel, dragged over glass. "Calder, I wondered when you'd crawl out of whatever hole you were hiding in." Daniel didn't flinch. He positioned himself in front of Clara, shielding her. "I don't crawl." Kane's laugh was soft, cruel. Still cocky, still thinking you can stand alone against the tide. His gaze shifted to Clara, lingering with the kind of hunger that made her blood run cold. And this must be the prize. the untouchable CEO. My. No wonder you've come back to play hero. Clara pressed into Daniel's back, her nails digging into his jacket. Daniel's voice dropped dangerous. She's not yours to even look at. The bikers laughed a low ripple of sound. The air reeked of gasoline, sweat, and smoke. Kane tilted his head, mocking. One man, 50 of mine. You think you can keep her safe? Daniel's reply was quiet, steady, but it struck like a hammer. Try me. The tension snapped. The first biker lunged, chain swinging. Daniel moved like lightning, ducking under the arc and slamming his elbow into the man's ribs. Bone cracked. The chain fell uselessly. Daniel spun, kicking the attacker into two others. Another came at him with a bat. Daniel caught it mid-swing, ripped it free, and turned it into a weapon of his own, cracking the wood across a jaw. Clara could only watch in horror and awe, every move an impossible blur. But for every man he felt more pressed forward. Boots pounded, fists flew steel, flashed. Daniel fought like a storm, unleashed punches, kicks, grapples, each blow, efficient, brutal. His training turned chaos into rhythm, his body a weapon honed by war. Clara pressed against the shed, her body trembling, every nerve screaming at her to flee, but her heart refused to abandon him. He was one man holding off 50, and somehow, impossibly, he was winning. Kane watched, arms folded, lips curved in an amused sneer. Still impressive, he called over the clash. But let's see how long you last when I decide the game's over. Daniel slammed one biker through a stack of pallets, spun, and shot another who rushed with a knife. His eyes flicked to Clara. She was still safe, still untouched. But his muscles burned, his breath came harder, and the tide wasn't slowing. Then Kane raised his hand. Instantly the swarm froze. Silence rolled in heavy and sudden. Only the lap of water against the pier filled the gap. Kane stepped closer. Slow, deliberate. His boots echoed. You've proved your point, Calder. You're still dangerous. He leaned forward slightly, eyes gleaming like a predator. But you can't keep this up. Not forever, and you know what I want. Daniel wiped blood from his lip, voice steady. You'll never have her. Kane's smile widened, thin and sharp. We'll see. He flicked his hand. Instantly, the bikers parted, a path opening through the mist. I'll let you live tonight. Consider it. Mercy. But the clock's ticking. Next time I take her, and I bury you. The roar of engines came again. One by one, the bikers mounted their bikes, the thunder of exhaust swallowing the harbor as they pulled away. Kane lingered, his gaze fixed on Daniel and Clara until the fog swallowed him too. When the sound finally faded, Clara collapsed to her knees, shaking so violently she could barely breathe. Why didn't he kill us? She whispered. Daniel knelt beside her, his hand steady on her back. His voice was low, grim. Because Kane doesn't just want blood. He wants fear. He wants control. Clara lifted her eyes to him, wide and desperate. So what do we do? Daniel stared into the mist, every nerve in him humming with the certainty of war. We take the fight to him, before he comes for us. The night air carried the faintest echo of laughter, like Kane's shadow still lingered. Clara shivered, realizing they had only survived the first strike. The motel room was dim lit only by a single flickering bulb that buzzed like a trapped insect. Clara sat on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling as she tried to wipe the grime from her face with a damp towel. She could still hear the roar of those motorcycles echoing in her skull like the night wouldn't let her go. Daniel paced the room like a caged lion, shoulders taut, jaw grinding. He had patched the gash on his arm with duct tape and gauze, but blood still seeped through. His shirt clung to his back, drenched in sweat and streaked with dirt. Clara glanced at him, voice shaky. You took on 50 men tonight. You should be dead. Daniel stopped, finally looking at her. His eyes were calm but hard like steel that had been through the fire too many times. I fought worse, in worse places. Her throat tightened. That man Kane. He looked at me like I was already his. Why didn't he just finish it? Daniel sank into the chair across from her, the springs creaking under his weight. He rubbed his palms together, staring at the floor as though seeing ghosts only he could recognize. Because Kane doesn't just kill, he hunts. He wants you afraid, cornered. That's how he keeps control. He wants me stretched thin before he makes his move. Clara pressed the towel to her face, trying to steady herself. Then what do we do? We can't just wait for him to come back. Daniel leaned forward, voice low. We don't wait. We hit him where it hurts. She blinked at him, stunned. You mean fight him? That's insane. He has an army. I don't need an army. Daniel said, his tone quiet but firm. I need precision. I know how he moves, where he hides the weak points he doesn't guard because he thinks no one's stupid enough to try. That's where we strike. Claire's hands dropped into her lap. She wanted to argue, wanted to scream at the madness of it, but a flicker of something steadied her. The way he had stood between her and death, unflinching like he'd been born for it. For the first time, she wondered if maybe he was the only one who could stand against a man like Cain. Her voice softened. And what happens when you're gone? When he finally takes you down. Daniel's gaze lifted to hers, unwavering. Then at least I'll go down making sure he never lays a hand on you. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the hum of the bulb and the muffled sound of a truck passing outside. Claire's eyes stung, though she wouldn't let tears fall. She hated how his words both terrified and comforted her. Finally, she asked, almost a whisper, Why are you doing this for me? Daniel leaned back, exhaling. His expression shifted, the soldier's mask cracking for the briefest moment. Because I've buried enough good people who didn't deserve it. I'm not burying you. The weight of his words pressed into her chest, leaving her unable to speak. Just then a loud bang rattled the thin motel door. Both of them jolted. Daniel's hand went instantly to the pistol tucked in the waistband of his jeans. Claire's breath caught in her throat. Another bang this time, followed by a voice. Room service. Daniel's eyes narrowed. He moved silently, flattening against the wall, signaling Clara to stay put. The knob jiggled once, twice, then the lock gave way. The door creaked open and a shadow slipped inside. Daniel struck first, grabbing the intruder by the collar and slamming him against the wall with brutal force. The man let out a choked grunt, dropping a duffel bag at his feet. Wait, don't shoot! The man sputtered, hands raised. He was thin, jittery eyes darting like a cornered rat. Daniel pressed the gun barrel to his temple. Talk. Fast. The man swallowed hard, sweat beating on his forehead. I was sent. Not by Cain. By someone else. Clara stood clutching the towel like a shield. By who? The intruder's gaze flicked to her, then back to Daniel's icy stare. By someone who wants Cain gone just as much as you do. Daniel didn't ease the pressure of the gun. Name. Reyes, the man stammered. He runs shipments through this port, but Cain's been bleeding him dry. He wants an ally. Said if you want to take Cain down, he can help. Daniel's jaw tightened. He didn't trust men like Reyes smugglers, opportunists. But every instinct in him knew Cain wouldn't stop. Allies might be the only chance. Why send you? Daniel asked coldly. The man shifted nervously. Because I owe him. And because if I cross Cain, I'm dead anyway. At least this way, I've got a chance. Daniel finally lowered the gun, but only slightly. His eyes cut to the duffel bag. What's in the bag? The man nudged it forward with his foot. Daniel kicked it open. Inside, stacks of cash, a few small weapons, and a burner phone. Reyes said to call when you're ready, the man whispered. Clara moved closer, her voice trembling. Daniel, is this real, or is it another trap? Daniel holstered the pistol, but his face remained carved from stone. Doesn't matter. If Cain has enemies, we use them, but we move on our terms. The man sagged with relief, wiping his forehead. Then you'll meet him. Daniel's silence was answer enough. The man nodded quickly, backing toward the door. I'll tell him. He'll expect your call. When the door shut behind him, the motel fell into stillness again. Clara exhaled shakily. This is insane. We're in the middle of something bigger than I ever imagined. Daniel sat back down, picking up the phone with careful hands. That's the only way to fight a man like Cain. You don't just face him, you tear down the empire he hides behind. Clara sat beside him, heart hammering. For the first time, she realized this wasn't just about survival anymore. This was war, and Daniel had just chosen the battlefield. The burner phone lay between them like a coiled wire. Daniel scrolled through the contacts Reyes had preloaded, Each name a doorway into rooms he didn't want to re-enter. Brokers, freight handlers, a junior accountant at a logistics firm that only existed on Wednesdays. Clara watched him from the edge of the motel bed, hands wrapped around a styrofoam cup that had long since gone cold. "What if he's stringing us along?" she asked. Daniel didn't look up. "Men like Reyes don't string people. They barter. He'll want something we don't want to give. And if what he wants is me?" She tried to keep her tone dry and failed. "Then we say no," he answered, thumb stopping on a number labeled simply Ledger. "And we find someone else." He dialed. A woman picked up on the second ring, her voice clipped professional, like she'd trained herself not to betray anything, even boredom. "Go," Calder Daniel said. "Reyes said you could move light fast." Silence cautious, then drop. Daniel rattled off an address he trusted, a self-storage bay 2 miles from the hotel, a unit that belonged to Kendra's cousin and housed old parade equipment the city had forgotten to collect. 30 minutes, he added, and ended the call. Clara stood setting the cup down. "We're just trusting this. We're trusting pressure," he said, shrugging into his jacket. Kane squeezed Reyes too hard. "That makes leverage." They left the motel with their hoods up, wind smacking their faces like wet cloth. Boston's streets were bright in the brittle way winter nights are neon signs pooling on dirty snow bus doors, sighing steam venting from grates. At the storage lot, sodium lights buzzed like hornets. Kendra idled in her SUV down the block, shadowing them. Daniel had insisted, and she hadn't argued. Unit number 203 rolled upward. Inside stacked con boxes and a dusty papier-mâché lobster. A girl barely out of her 20s stepped from behind the float's claw-knit cap, pulled low freckles like constellations across her nose. She carried a banker's box and the tense alertness of someone who knew which exit was closest at all times. "You Ledger?" Daniel asked. She tipped her chin. "You called her today," he said. "Tomorrow's flexible." She set the box on the concrete and flipped back the lid. Inside, thumb drives loose paper clipped into irregular stacks, a legal pad with arrows drawn to account numbers. "Wire transfers," she said softly. "From shell companies to a main holding, then into Boston real estate trusts." "I don't care about any of that." "This," she tapped a thin binder at the bottom, "is what your lady wants. Kane's security contracts, names, dates, payouts. He moves muscle through an events firm and launders the cash through charity balls." Her mouth twisted. "Of course he does." Clara leaned in. The pages smelled faintly of toner and cigarettes. "How did you get this?" The girl's eyes flicked to Daniel, then back. "I'm good at pretending no one sees me. You'd be surprised how often bad men talk in front of someone they think is furniture." Clara found herself liking her immediately. "Why help us?" The girl lifted one shoulder. "Because at my pay grade I don't get bodyguards. If Kane owns this city, girls like me get small funerals." Daniel closed the box, handed her a small envelope. "For the trouble." She didn't take it. "Don't want your cash. Want my city back." Then she smiled, and it made her look even younger. "You'll need a stage." She nodded toward the hotel's direction where blue light haloed the skyline. "You've already got one, don't you?" They left with the box. Kendra trailed them to the curb and lowered her window. "You're not sleeping, are you?" she asked Daniel. He shook his head. "After this?" "Uh-huh," she said. "I'll get Emma from school tomorrow." "Don't argue." He didn't. 2 extra turns, he reminded, and she rolled her eyes as if to say, "I was born with extra turns," and drove off. By dawn, Clara's corner office glowed warm against the pale harbor. She and Daniel spread the materials across the desk, taping flow maps to glass walls, connecting arrows with string, like a cop show parody that had suddenly become very real. Clara called her GC, then a DA she trusted just enough to loop in. "I need you in my office at noon," she said. "Bring a warrant template. And courage." From Daniel's phone, a text, Reese. "Found something in the old team cloud. Thought it got wiped. It didn't. Helmet feed. Basra." Daniel stared at the screen. His thumb hovered because he could already hear the audio under his skin. The crackle of comms, the 2 taps on aluminum, the way Hart's voice carried easy when the room made fear heavy. He pressed play. Grainy green, a doorway left. The camera shakes like a heartbeat. A shadow cuts across the frame, tall, angular, with a grin that never reached his eyes. Kane, younger by a decade, turning toward the contractor SUV, hand slicing the air in a retreat signal that wasn't in anyone's plan. Seconds later, the feed arcs wild as an explosion blooms where cover was supposed to be. Clara's breath hitched. This is what he did to you. It's what he did to Hart, Daniels said, throat lined with gravel. He forwarded the file to the DA, then to himself again, and then to 3 other addresses he didn't name, out loud the redundancy of a man who'd been in too many rooms where the only copy vanished. At 11, Clara called a press conference at the Harrington Hotel across the common neutral territory with better lighting. Her head of comms went pale when she heard, then steadied. "We script nothing," Clara said. "We show everything." They arrived early. The Harrington's ballroom wore its wealth less loudly than the Imperial's plush carpet, the color of midnight, a chandelier that glowed rather than glittered. Technicians clipped mics to lapels. The event manager tried to assert some semblance of run of show until Daniel handed him a printed list that was in essence the same, but with the exits marked and the risers braced. "Where do you want to stand?" Clara asked. "Back," Daniel said, scanning the room. "Left of stage. I'm not the story." At noon, sharp cameras winked awake. The first rows filled with press the back with employees in cardigans who'd ducked out of lunch because history had sent an email. Clara stepped up to the podium, the fox-eared backpack somewhere across town in Kendra's truck, the weight of a father's promise sitting between her shoulder blades. "Good afternoon," she began. "For weeks I've been pressured to sell my company to a man who believes fear is a strategy. Last night that pressure turned violent again. Today I'm going to show you why I refused and who exactly has been asking." Murmurs traveled like wind through tall grass. A few phones lifted higher. Somewhere near the doors, a man in a navy suit slipped in and leaned against the wall like he owned it. "Kane." He didn't bother to hide. Clara nodded to the AV tech. The lights dimmed, the projection screen hummed, and the Basra footage filled the wall, green, jittery, terrible in the way truth often is. The room turned into held breath. Hart's voice. 2 minutes. The contractor team's angle. We're pulled repeat. The cut of Kane's profile decisiveness weaponized as desertion. Then the blast that erased a safe path and a friend. Clara didn't narrate. She let the silence say what no words could. Then came the ledgers. Wire transfers hopping like stones across a river of clean paper shell companies, named like jokes that rich men make at poor men's funerals. The event security contracts stamped and signed mapped to the very nights fists had flown in lobbies dressed like cathedrals. A second screen showed a live browser with a charity gala website still listing Kane's firm as platinum security partners. A third showed the 501c3 filing that made donations to that charity a tax write-off for men who preferred their crimes with receipts. Reporters began shouting over one another. "Miss Morell, did you share this with authorities?" Mr. Kane. Response. "Is this doctored? Is that you in the video? Were weapons trafficked through your firms?" Kane stepped from the wall, adjusting a cufflink that was probably worth a year of rent on Daniel's floor. "This is a smear," he said smoothly. "Old footage ripped from context. Faked records. Miss Morell is throwing mud to distract from her failing company and her questionable relationship with hotel staff." The last line drifted oily through the air. Daniel felt spines stiffen in the back rows, the hurt of a class of work insulted in their own city. He watched Clara absorb the blow, roll it in her palm, and set it down. "My relationship with my staff," she said crisp as winter, "is that we don't leave people behind." A murmur rose, not quite applause, not yet. Then the double doors opened and a small column of blue uniforms entered, led by a detective whose weariness read as fairness rather than fatigue. He moved like a man accustomed to being lied to, gently. He approached the dais but spoke to neither Clara nor Kane first. He looked at the screens at the papers on an evidence cart the DA's team had assembled in a side room at the row of names on the ledger, whose addresses probably lived in his jurisdiction. "Victor Kane," he said, voice. "Even we have some questions about the coordination of private security and illegal activity." "You'll come with us?" Kane smiled. "On what charge?" "For now." The detective produced a folded page. "We'll start with conspiracy and money laundering. I'm sure there will be more. A ripple turned into a wave. Phones, always first to judgment and sometimes first to truth, captured the moment as two officers flanked Kane. He tried to pull that molten charm over the room like a net one more time. "You're making a mistake," he told them. "You don't know who I—" The detective didn't bother to reply. He had probably heard the sentence 1,000 times. Outside, sirens, not the screaming kind, but the patient procedural ones. In the second row, someone started clapping. Not loud, not theatrical, just hands meeting in recognition. It spread hesitant, then sure. Daniel stayed in the shadow left of the stage, chin-tucked eyes on the aisles. "Daddy." The voice cut through the noise like a bell. Emma ponytail bouncing, fox backpack thumping burst from the side door where Kendra had snuck her in when the hall had filled past safe capacity. She barreled toward Daniel and hit him at the waist like Joy does sudden honest with all her weight. Kendra leaned in the doorway, 2 fingers raised 2 extra turns and mouthed, "All clear." Daniel dropped to a knee, arms around his daughter. The world briefly narrowed to the smell of crayons and winter shampoo. "You're supposed to be with Kendra," he said into her hair. "Everyone was watching on their phones," she said, breathless. "We had to come." Kendra slid over, eyes glossy. "She insisted on asking you." Emma pulled back, serious now, searchlight eyes on his. "Did we win?" Daniel looked up past her to the stage where Clara stood very straight, the screens behind her now frozen on the ledger page that had a place for every dollar and a dollar for every lie. He took in the room, the press that had seen the wrong story, and now had the right one, the cops doing their tired work, the employees who looked like people who might finally exhale. "We told the truth," he said. "That's the only win that matters." Emma considered this, then nodded like a commander conceding the point. "Okay," she said, and squeezed him once more before releasing him to the wide world again. Clara descended the steps. She didn't reach for Daniel, she didn't need to. The space between them felt less like a gap now, and more like a choice they could make later or not at all. She crouched to Emma's height. "You counted to 68, she said softly. Emma grinned. "Today I can count to 100. Clara smiled back, and something human and delicate moved through the air of the Harrington, something like relief, something almost like hope. Outside, the city resumed its winter errands, lunches, bought dogs, walked steam rising from grates. Inside, the stagehands dimmed the projector and folded chairs with the efficiency that keeps cities from dissolving into the drama they host. Daniel watched Kane disappear into a hallway of law, then turned toward the door where ordinary light waited. He took Emma's hand. He glanced once at Clara. "Come on," he said. "We've got a lot of small things to take care of." And for the first time in a long time, the path ahead didn't look like a battlefield. It looked like a street, which for now was more than enough. The snow had started again by the time they left the Harrington. It wasn't the harsh, stinging kind that whipped sideways off the harbor, but a soft drift flake swirling under the streetlights like tired confetti. Daniel tugged Emma's hat lower. Her cheeks flushed pink against the cold. Clara walked a half step behind them, her heels crunching against salted pavement, shoulders squared, though her body trembled with the come-down of adrenaline. For a moment, none of them spoke. The city seemed quieter than usual, as if it too was digesting what had just happened inside the ballroom. Then Emma tilted her head up, tugging Daniel's sleeve. "Are the bad guys gone now?" Daniel glanced down at her. Some of them, he admitted. But bad guys don't all wear the same coat. Some of them hide in nice suits. Some of them smile a lot. That's why we have to keep watching. Emma considered this with the solemnity of a child still learning what the world does to people. "Then I'll help you watch." She tightened her grip on his hand. Kendra's SUV pulled to the curb. She leaned out the driver's window, smirking at the sight of Daniel carrying both the banker's box and Emma's backpack. "Looks like you've officially upgraded from bodyguard to full-service dad." "Don't start," he muttered, but there was warmth in his tone. Clara hesitated before climbing in. She should have gone back to her tower of glass and steel, should have convened lawyers and prepped for the avalanche of subpoenas. Instead, she opened the passenger door and slid into the seat beside Kendra. Daniel and Emma piled into the back. The car smelled of fast food wrappers, and cinnamon gum lived in a way Clara's own town car never did. As they pulled into traffic, Boston seemed to pulse with new energy. Screens on storefronts already looped the footage of Kane being escorted out in cuffs. Hashtags scrolled across taxicab monitors. A story had broken loose from whispers and now raced through the bloodstream of the city. "Don't celebrate yet," Daniel said, watching it all blur past. "He's got lawyers who eat indictments for breakfast." Clara nodded. "And friends on boards in clubs in rooms we can't see." She turned slightly, studying him. "But he doesn't have you, or Hart, or me," Emma piped up. "And me?" The adults laughed. Quick surprised a sound that felt like oxygen after hours of holding their breath. They drove toward South Boston, where Kendra's row house squatted between others just like it. Brick facades soothed by years of storms. Inside, the heat wrapped around them, radiator hiss mixing with the smell of chili simmering on the stove. "Dinner's on me," Kendra announced, "and no one's leaving until I say so." They ate at her narrow kitchen table. Emma slurped noodle sauce, painting her chin. Clara tried to keep up small talk, asking about school projects and favorite books, but her mind kept sliding back to the footage, to Kane's smirk, to the inevitability of appeals and threats. Daniel caught the distance in her eyes. When Emma left the table to dig through Kendra's board games, he leaned forward. "What happens next, Clara?" "After tonight," she sighed, "tomorrow will be hell. Kane's PR team will flood the airwaves. He'll paint me as hysterical, you as compromised. He'll find people to swear affidavits they never read. But something's shifted. You felt it in that room, didn't you?" Daniel nodded slowly. "People stopped being afraid." "Exactly." She sipped water, then added softer, "I don't know what that makes us." "Heroes." "Targets both," he said simply. Kendra returned with Emma perched on her hip. "Targets, heroes, whatever. Nobody's leaving this girl out of it." She kissed Emma's cheek. "Tomorrow I'll take her to school again. Let Daniel and Clara do the adult gladiator thing." Emma squirmed down, running back to her pile of cards and dice. Daniel's expression softened, then hardened again when his phone buzzed. A new message from Reese. "You shook the tree. Careful what falls." Attached was a grainy photo of two men loitering outside a downtown parking garage, faces shadowed but posture too familiar. Kane's watchers. Daniel pocketed the phone. "We need to rotate where we sleep tonight." Clara frowned. "He's under arrest." "And probably posting bail before we finish dessert," Daniel said. "He'll want to remind us cages don't hold him." The tension returned coiling through the small kitchen. Kendra broke it with a clap of her hands. "Then we lock the doors, set the alarms, and deal with tomorrow." "Tomorrow. Right now this kid has challenged me to Uno." Emma cheered. Clara managed a smile. Daniel sat back, watching the three of them argue over colors and draw fours, and for the first time in years felt something nearly forgotten, a glimpse of normal. Later, when Emma finally collapsed on the couch in a fortress of blankets, Daniel stood at the window scanning the street. Snow drifted down, quieting the world. Clara joined him, her shoulder brushing his. "You'll never stop scanning," she said. "Not while she's breathing," he answered. "And me." He turned his head, studying her profile in the faint glow of the street lamp. "You made your choice today. You're in the fight now." "So, yeah. You too." For a moment, silence held them. Then Clara whispered, "Thank you." Daniel wanted to tell her there was nothing to thank him for, that he was only repaying a debt to a man who never got to come home, but the words lodged in his throat. Instead, he said, "Get some sleep. Tomorrow we build the case." She nodded, lingered a second longer, then retreated to the guest room Kendra had made up. Daniel stayed by the window until the first pale streaks of dawn cut across the roofs. He didn't know if Kane would come with lawyers, with muscle, or with something worse. But he knew this, they weren't running anymore. For Hart, for Clara, for Emma, and in that knowledge the weight felt a little less impossible. Morning broke with a gray haze over Boston. The snow had crusted into brittle ice that crunched under passing cars, and the city's hum returned, though muted, as if everyone had read the same headline at breakfast. Clara awoke in Kendra's spare room, sheets twisted around her legs, heart pounding before she even remembered why. The night replayed in flashes, Kane's sneer, Daniel's steady voice, Emma's laughter around the kitchen table. She rose, tugged on the blazer she'd abandoned over a chair, and found Daniel already in the kitchen. He was dressed in jeans and a flannel, but his posture was sharp like a soldier on a forward outpost. He poured coffee into 2 mugs without asking. "Sleep?" he asked. Clara shook her head. "You didn't try." He slid the mug toward her. Reese texted. Kane posted bail at 3 a.m. The words landed like a fist. Clara set the mug down untouched. "So he's free. For now. Which means he'll push back harder. He'll want to make you the villain." Kendra joined them, hair wild robe half-tied. The news is already buzzing. Talk shows are debating if Clara Moore is the fallen angel of Wall Street. She made air quotes. Apparently standing up to corruption equals hysteria now. Clara grimaced, but Daniel touched her elbow, grounding her. "That's why we stick together. Today we get ahead of his spin. Hart will arrange a press call." Before Clara could reply, Emma shuffled in, rubbing her eyes. "Is it safe to go to school today?" she asked quietly. Daniel crouched. "I'll walk you myself. No one touches you while I'm around." She nodded solemnly, then whispered, "And Miss Clara too." Clara swallowed the lump in her throat. "Yes, sweetheart. Me too." Mercedes. By mid-morning, they were back downtown. A small press pool gathered on the courthouse steps. Cameras clicked as Clara, flanked by Daniel and Hart, delivered a short statement. "Corruption thrives on silence. Last night we broke that silence. The fight is not over, but neither am I." Her voice shook once, but Daniel's presence beside her kept her steady. Questions erupted, but Hart cut it off. No further comments at this time. He hustled her inside where Reese waited with files. Kane's already leaning on judges, Reese reported grimly. Rumors of bribes. "We can't just fight this in court, we need the people on our side." Daniel leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Then show them what he's done. Every family he bankrupted, every veteran he foreclosed on. Put faces to the numbers." Clara nodded slowly. "Stories." She glanced at Daniel. "That's your strength, isn't it? People trust you more than they trust suits like me." He gave a humorless chuckle. "They trust scars more than silk ties." That afternoon, they visited a community center in Dorchester. News crews trailed discreetly, capturing footage. Clara stood in front of families who had lost homes, listening, taking notes. Daniel noticed how her hands shook when children clung to their mothers, because once she had been that child. He rested a hand at her back, a silent promise. An older veteran approached Daniel. "You're Hart's guy, aren't you?" "The SEAL?" His voice cracked. "I saw you on the feed last night. My son served too. Lost him overseas. Thank you for standing up to Kane. Men like him forget who pays the price." Daniel clasped his hand firmly. "I haven't forgotten." The veteran's eyes watered. "Then keep fighting." Daniel felt the weight of it settle on his shoulders. He nodded once, an unspoken vow. Evening fell and exhaustion pulled at them, but Reese's warning lingered. They returned to Kendra's rotating shifts to watch the street. Daniel barely closed his eyes before Emma's whisper roused him. "Daddy," she murmured, pointing at the frosted window. "There's a car outside." Daniel slid silently to the glass. A black sedan idled across the streetlights, off engine, steaming in the cold. He felt the prickle at the base of his skull, predators circling. He grabbed his coat and stepped onto the porch. Snow crunched under his boots. The sedan's door cracked open, then shut again, as if testing his reaction. Daniel raised a hand deliberately slow, letting them know he saw them. The car peeled away. When he returned inside, Clara was waiting. "They're watching us already. They always were," he said. "Now they want us to feel it." She studied him, her voice soft. "And do you, Portia?" He met her eyes, weary but unyielding. "I feel it every second, but I don't fear it." She exhaled, the tension easing slightly. "Then neither will I." Later, when the house quieted, Clara lingered in the kitchen. Daniel joined her, pouring water. She whispered, "You could walk away, you know. You've done more than anyone could ask." He stared at her, jaw tight. "Emma needs a safe world to grow up in. Walking away doesn't give her that. And Hart deserves this fight." "I'm in it, Clara, to the end." She nodded, eyes glistening, but didn't press further. Instead, she whispered, "Then so am I." Snow thickened outside, blanketing the street in silence. Inside, 2 battle-weary souls sat shoulder to shoulder, preparing for the storm Kane would bring with morning. And in that fragile quiet, Hope stirred not because the fight was over, but because they no longer fought alone. Dawn came thin and glassy, a pale wash over a city that had not really slept. Plows bumped along the avenues, pushing last night's snow into low walls that steamed in the cold. In Kendra's kitchen, bacon hissed in a cast-iron pan, and a kettle rattled on the back burner. Daniel stood at the window while the world put itself back together, hands flat, to the sill eyes on the street. Behind him, Emma's pencil scratched across a worksheet, and Clara's voice murmured into a phone, the low, measured cadence of a woman bracing a board that would spend the day pretending it hadn't been hiding behind fear. "We vote at 2, Clara said, covering the receiver. Reaffirmation of control authorization to cooperate with prosecutors, a public ethics audit, if they choose courage. Daniel nodded once. They'll follow strength, and if they don't, then we make sure they don't forget what strength looks like, he said, sliding a plate of bacon toward Emma and a mug toward Clara. He swallowed coffee that tasted like cinders in winter and leaned back into the day. Reese's text arrived as frost on glass. Court moved up Kane to hearing at noon. Watch the parking deck on Tremont. He never walks through a front door when he thinks he owns the roof. Kendra whistled low when he read it aloud. You're not going alone. You've got a better plan, Daniel asked. Yeah, she said, shrugging into her EMT jacket. Not letting you be a martyr before lunch. They split the day into segments like a mission brief. Kendra would take Emma to school, the long way, 2 extra turns, 3 sets of watchful shopkeepers who knew Daniel by the things he fixed and the tips he didn't have enough to leave. Clara would go to headquarters with Hart and the GC sweeps at every door IDs reissued, 1 elevator locked down. Daniel would ride the outer ring like weather visible enough to change how people behaved, invisible enough to keep the ones who needed him from getting spooked. They hit the street in a line, Kendra and Emma first all pink scarf and fox backpack and mittened waves to the Bodega Cat. Then Clara and Hart in a black sedan with the heater stuck on August. Then Daniel on foot cutting alleys that smelled like damp cardboard and stale beer, the city's rear corridors where deliveries entered and secrets left. By 10:30, the courthouse plaza swarmed with cameras again, lenses blooming toward the steps. A radio van idled with its mast fully extended white against the hard sky. Daniel checked sightlines, memorized the faces that loitered without a reason and the reasons that loitered behind certain faces. He felt the shift before he saw it air-thinned, a current gathered at the edges the way flocks change direction without one leader. From the east, 2 men peeled off a knot of smokers and headed for the Tremont garage, their pace too casual to be casual. He didn't run. Running is a language that invites a chase. He crossed the street, entered the concrete spiral with a maintenance man's confidence, and let the smell of wet tires and antifreeze fill his lungs. He took the stairs, not the ramp. 3rd deck. 4th. 5th. He reached the roof and stopped. The sky was the color of steel. The wind shoved him a step, and then thought better of it. On the far side of the roof, a cluster of men in dark coats pretended to smoke, while their fingers tested the weight of what was hidden in their pockets. Beyond them, the lip of the structure fell away to a view of a winter-gray Boston common, and the steady drip of the city continuing to be itself. Between Daniel and the cluster, a woman in a charcoal suit, hair pinned back tight, walking toward the roof access door with Hart 3 paces behind. Clara Daniel called voice level but carrying. She turned. The smoking men didn't. The one in the center exhaled into the wind and smiled without warmth. Back entrance, after all, he said, as if complimenting a choice he'd made for them. I was beginning to think you'd lost your instincts. Clara stopped. Hart's hand went to his coat, then fell again. A lawyer, not a soldier, remembering which weapons his license allowed him to carry. The man stepped forward, the others fanning to his sides like chess pieces taking their squares. He wasn't Kane. He was the knife Kane sent when he needed a room softened. A distinctive scar stitched his jawline, a souvenir from men who didn't send knives. Doyle had worn one like that. This was a different angle, a different grin, same company. Kane sends his regrets, the man said lightly. He's delayed. But I'm a very good consolation prize, Ms. Morell. Mr. Hart. My client wants a moment. No, Daniel said. The word sat between them like a brick sunk in ice. He kept his hands open, visible. Nobody goes anywhere. The grin tilted. The janitor speaks. He took a step too close to the edge of the four-step square Daniel was already measuring on the roof. You must be the one who made my colleagues famous in the ballroom. Fame's not what I handed them, Daniel said. Breathing is. You could hand us the woman, the man suggested. Less paperwork, fewer bruises, everyone home in time for the evening news. Clara's voice came from a clean, cold place. I'll walk through a storm before I'll walk with you. The man's smile died. He flicked his fingers a small command and the line advanced. Time braided itself. Things Daniel had done on other roofs in other countries came back through doors he'd kept shut. Weight shifted, the wind pulled hard. A gull cut the slate of the sky with laughter. He moved. First step inside the lead man's reach. Palm to elbow, turn guide. The wrist rolled. The gun went looking for a place to rest and chose the concrete. Second step, pivot to the left. Lift a chin with the heel of a hand soft enough to sleep, not enough to break. Third, a side step that made two men run into each other because they were running toward a point that moved when it should have held still. Fourth, a brief grace a shoulder tap to send a body past the place where a body thought it knew the ground. Hart hustled Clara toward the stairwell, but the scarred man anticipated the move and cut them off, a blade flashing dull in the gray. Daniel flowed between edges and outcomes and put his forearm against the man's wrist before the blade had chosen a destination. The knife skipped across the roof like a flat stone thrown low over a lake. Try again, the man panted. No, Daniel said more softly now, and caught him at the hip, used the man's own torque to put him on his back without asking gravity's permission. Concrete whispered against wool. Breath left a body in a sound that remembered a younger fall. Footsteps took the stairs two at a time. Not a threat boots that were trained to show up and ask what hurt. Kendra burst out onto the roof, EMT jacket bright as a flag. Left side, she barked to no one, and everyone tossing a pair of flex cuffs that skidded to Daniel's feet. Behind her, two uniformed officers who'd been waiting on the courthouse steps, patience like a second spine, shouldered through the door with the relief of men whose day had been waiting for something to do. Hands where I can see them, an officer shouted, voice steady. The scarred man tried to rise, met Daniel's eyes, and found the difference between a brawl and a decision. He set his palms flat to the roof. Down the ramp, a low engine note pulsed, a luxury sedan taking curves too smooth. A black car nosed into view, stopped, idled. The rear door opened as if a valet had rolled out invisible carpet. Victor Kane stepped onto the roof in a dark coat that hid its price and a smile that hoped to hide its owner. He looked older than yesterday, as if a rest had skinned the lacquer off him, but his eyes still carried the conviction of a man who thought he could order the weather. Mr. Callahan, he said pleasantly, savoring the syllables. I was worried you'd be too busy basking in the press to meet me. Daniel didn't move. The officers didn't either. The scarred man face to concrete chose silence. Clara took one step, so she stood not behind Daniel, but beside him. Turn around and put your hands behind your back, Mr. Kane, the nearer officer said. You're out on bail. You don't get to recruit a roof full of felonies on your lunch hour. Kane watched the man as if he were a waiter who'd brought the wrong glass. Officer, you don't know who we know enough? Kendra cut in, chin lifted in a way that made the statement more than backup. We also know a kid walks past this garage every day to get to her dad. She flicked her eyes briefly toward Daniel and back a small, fierce alignment. We're done letting you turn our blocks into battlegrounds. Something in the room, though there were no walls up here to hold sound, shifted. Even the wind seemed to pause. Kane's smile thinned into a line. He measured odds, counted heads, found no purchase. He extended his hands. The cuffs clicked like punctuation. You can't cage the future, he murmured to Daniel as the officer guided him toward the ramp. It's not the future you keep trying to sell, Daniel said, too low for anyone else. It's the bill. They took Kane down the spiral. The scarred man followed, flanked by Blue. The others became suddenly very interested in how quickly their feet could move when given a chance. Hart exhaled like a prayer spoken by someone who hadn't wanted to use that language in public. Clara touched the spot on her throat where a pulse beat that had counted her through worse than headlines. Kendra blew into her hands and then thumped Daniel once on the upper arm, a medic's hug that pretended to be diagnostic. You've got about 4 lives left, she said. Use them on school pickups and broken toasters. He almost smiled. Yes, ma'am. At 2, the board voted. You could hear the courage in their voices even through a speakerphone's tin. Clara kept the room honest. She didn't gloat. She set timelines, she promised audits, she told the truth, even where it cut her a little to hold it. Hart watched from the corner and decided to stop writing his resignation letter and start writing an ethics code. By 6, the light went the color of honey, and the park's paths frosted over again. They walked there because motion calms bodies that have been asked to be edges all day. Emma's boots squeaked. The string lights from a coffee kiosk made halos in the cold. A street musician tried Moon River and landed it on the 3rd try. Emma pointed to a heart-shaped patch in the snow where footprints had almost met. Look, she said. The ground loves us. It does today, Daniel said, and she took that as a contract the world had signed. Clara slipped her arm through his. Not a claim. Not a secret message to anyone watching, just a shared temperature against the last wind of the afternoon. What happens now? She asked. Small things, he said. Radiators and routes and bedtime chapters. He looked past the bandstand to a skyline that would never stop wanting to be bigger. Depositions and hearings, and people telling their stories into rooms that used to be too loud to hear them. He touched Emma's hat down over her ears as she spun once scarf trailing like a banner. We keep count. We keep our circles small and strong. And when the next storm comes, it will, he said. We'll meet it where it hits, not where it brags it will. They crossed under a row of bare maples branches, scribbling dark lines against the softening sky. Daniel felt the knot in his chest that had been there since a warehouse in another country ease by a measure he could finally name. It wasn't that the fight was over. It never would be. It was that the fight was no longer a thing he did alone in rooms lit too green to tell friend from enemy. Hart's 2 taps lived in his bones, and when he tapped the railing lightly once, twice, Emma tapped back without asking what it meant. Back home, the radiator hissed like a lullaby. Pancakes sizzled in a pan, and syrup made the kitchen smell like mornings worth waking for. The Fox backpack hung from its nail ears slumped as if they'd done their share of listening for the week. Clara sat at the table with her sleeves pushed up, explaining a spreadsheet to Emma with a pencil and a napkin drawing little arrows that made money into something a child's brain could call fair. Daniel watched them with the quiet of a man who had known other endings and chosen this one anyway. He set plates down, poured milk, and didn't reach for his phone when it buzzed against the counter. There would be time for calls, Reese the DA, the ledger girl, who had been invisible long enough to make herself essential. There would be time for public statements and private checks for fixing the fountain pump that still groaned 2 floors below the chandelier for changing the deadbolt that stuck in the cold. Dad, Emma said, mouthful of pancake. Are you a hero? He wiped syrup from her chin and shook his head. No, kiddo. I'm a dad. Clara's eyes met his over the rim of her glass. Something warm and steady lived there now, something earned rather than declared. Same thing Emma decided and took another bite. Outside the city dimmed its lights a notch like someone turning down the volume on a long day. Inside 3 ordinary people practiced peace the way you practice anything you want to be good at. Daily, imperfectly with patience for the parts that take longer to learn. The camera would pull back here if there had been one, catching the glow in the window and the way the snow lifted off the street in small puffs when the late bus hissed past. The man who could flatten 50 didn't think about the count anymore. He thought about the square of steps on a kitchen floor that got him from stove to table to sink and back to his chair where a girl who counted to 100 now leaned against his arm, and a woman who had turned power into a promise traced a fingertip around the rim of a mug and smiled. There were headlines waiting tomorrow. There were motions to file and men to keep from making more mess. There were strings of lights to coil and a faucet in 2C that had started its stubborn drip again. There were always storms lining up on the horizon like trains. But there was also the soft animal of the heart that had learned at last how to rest in the home it had built from 4 steps and a vow. And there in that small bright square the future did not need to be caged to be safe. It only needed to be held gently and without fear by people who had decided that what they protected was worth more than the noise that tried to scare it away. Word count what your ops 386. Your thoughts will help us create meaningful stories. And if you want to hear more powerful healing stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the bell icon so you don't miss any new episodes. And most importantly, Share this video with people who need a little hope today. Thank you so much for your time. We hear you, we listen to you, and we are honored to tell these stories for you.